This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. In 2005, I was essentially fired from my job at Barnard College. And the reason I was given was that my work, in particular my work on race, was, quote, dangerous, improper, and frightening, and had no place in the academy. That work was later published in a scholarly article and in A Renegade History of the United States. By and large, academics have ignored that work, but there have been a few professors still working, some with tenure, some who are prominent in their field, who have found the work and have found common cause with it. Now, there aren't that many of them. In fact, it's only been a few. But one of them, who has gotten into a lot of trouble on his own, shares so many of my analyses of race in America and is so brave in his willingness to talk about them that I was willing to go almost anywhere, even Texas, to interview him. This is my interview with Professor of Sociology at the University of Houston, Shayne Lee. So we're in Houston, Texas, in a fabulous Holiday Inn Express next to the I-10 freeway. And I'm here with one of my very favorite professors of all time, a guy who I got to know about 5 years ago, but only online because a mutual friend of ours recommended him to me. And he said, man, you got to read this dude's essay on Lil Wayne because it sounds a lot like you. And I did, and it is still to this day, one of my favorite essays ever written in many ways. And I recommend it to people all the time. I've even assigned it to my students several times. But one of the amazing things about this man right here, Shayne Lee, is that he's extremely prolific. How old are you, by the way?
46.
Yeah, I mean, that's young still. And you have 5 books and you're working on
my 5th.
Working on the 5th. And you have a whole host of op-eds you've written. And you've just done a lot. I mean, very few academics actually produce that much by the time they're 46.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and also on top of that, they're on fairly distinct, I mean, a lot of people would just sort of classify you under like, Black studies or something, but actually there's a whole lot of diversity of subject, right, for you in your career, which is also unusual. Usually people, whether they're doing Black studies or any other studies, they tend to be pretty narrow in their interests throughout their career, but you've talked about a lot of stuff. And I want to, so let's do that retrospective of your career already, even though you're only about halfway through it, but give people a sense of kind of the topics you're interested in. And we could just start by sort of, without getting into too much detail, just give them the sort of the basic arguments you've made and the trouble you've gotten into because of those arguments. So you started off writing about religion, right? Mm-hmm. And what has often been called the Black church, but a particular sort of wing of the Black church or particular movement within it. So where did you start in terms of your academic writing and what were you saying at the time?
Well, it actually begins with my experience as a Christian. Mm-hmm. I'm no longer a Christian now, but I went to Oral Roberts University for undergrad.
That's still the weirdest and most mysterious thing about you. Well, let's do that. Why were you at Oral Roberts? I have no idea.
To this day, I feel like that experience helped get me tenure, believe it or not.
Huh.
Because Oral Roberts University was the mecca of what's called the neo-Pentecostal world, a new way of being Pentecostal. The largest church in Houston, you're in Houston now. Mm-hmm. Do you know what the largest church in the country is? It's here in Houston.
No.
Joel Osteen's church.
Oh, what's the name of it?
Lakewood.
So that's called a mega church now, right?
Yeah, he's got so like he's part of this kind of charismatic or neo-Pentecostal movement.
Cool.
Being at Oral Roberts University, and he went there for a couple of semesters before he dropped out. But that's the mecca of all of these fringe kind of movements that are taking over American Protestantism, and all of the academics knew nothing about it. They didn't know who T.D. Jakes. They didn't know anything about guys like Benny Hinn.
Yeah.
So like here I am experientially. Every major preacher comes once a week. We get different speakers at chapel. Well, we had 2 chapels. So all of the big times preachers would come through. When Jakes was a country preacher, no one ever even heard of him when he visited Tulsa. One year, the next year, he spoke at a conference and became a star. The Azusa conference. I write about it in my book. But I first discovered who he was. I was a senior on campus, and I was about to go to the conference because the conference was on Oral Roberts University's campus, and everyone was saying, T.D. Jakes is coming. Who's that? And I was like, I don't know who that is. So we were like, who's this guy? West Virginia? He can't preach. He preached, became a star. And he was in my head the whole time. I was like, here's a guy no one's heard of. He didn't follow the traditional ranks of progression within a denomination, denominational leadership. You go in the black mainline kind of structure where the politics, like King. King is a Baptist. He was well integrated with the Black Baptist structure. No, Jakes is an outlier. He's a guy in West Virginia coal mining towns preaching. No one knows who he is, but he's developing a skill set that's able to reach people in a kind of vibrant neo-Pentecostal way that was gaining momentum all over the country. And he gets his big break and he blows up. But the academics don't know what to do, so they just look down on him. I think it was the Oral Roberts experience that set me up to say somebody needs to explain how a guy goes from being a country preacher to being on the cover of Time magazine with the question, is this man the next Billy Graham? Right.
So your first book's on T.D. Jakes, that's who you're talking about. So how big was his denominator, or what do you call it, congregation now? How many people are T.D. Jakes followers?
There was 28,000 members in his church, but that's just his church.
That's just the church, the physical brick and mortar church.
Yes. Yeah. In my opinion, he is the most significant Black preacher since Martin Luther King.
Still?
Yes.
Really?
The most significant. As far as influence, he's produced movies. His conferences have broken records at the Georgia Dome and other. I mean, this guy can draw 100,000 people to an event. So yeah, T.D. Jakes is no other Black preacher has ever done what he's done as far as in the business realm, as far as entertainment, as far as books, prolific best-selling books. So this guy's a machine, and academics didn't know what to do with him. And I was there when he got his big breaks.
He had a TV show for a long time, right? Didn't he? T.D. Jakes?
Oh yeah, he may still even be on TV.
Which had many. Do you know how many listeners? Was big, right? So would it be fair to assume that his audience is the biggest of any Black preacher now?
I would think that would be a conservative assumption.
Really? Oh, wow.
That's
really?
Not even going out on any limb.
Huh.
Like I'm saying, he's the most popular Black preacher alive, and he's the most significant Black preacher since Martin Luther King Jr.
So here's the reason that academics don't know about him. It's because he's very, very popular and very, very important to people we claim to care about very much, yes. Right? Isn't that interesting, right? The Blacks it's probably a working class,
that's the
right
thing.
Audience. Yeah,
he represents the masses. His message. He wasn't trained at a traditional seminary. He didn't come up the ranks of the mainline Black denominations like either African Methodist Episcopal, Black Baptist denominations. He came on the outskirts, and in doing that, they gave him the room to improvise. And so here he is now drawing people. Once he gets famous, he's drawing people all over the country. He's tapped into these, it's not just Jakes, he's tapped into these networks of preachers and advertising magazines and this world that exists. Oral Roberts was a person big who made this world big. And most academics had no clue about this world, the world that would make a Joel Osteen right now one of the biggest stars in this country. And so like my first 2 books explain their popularity. Because again, like you mentioned, as far as popularity, there's what I call kind of neo-Marxist logic amongst my colleagues, that if something's popular, it must not be good.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
If something appeals to the masses, it must not be good.
Right.
And I consider myself more of a student of the Black masses than a teacher. A lot of my colleagues, they want to lecture.
Nice.
They want to police and tell them, you shouldn't like this person, you should like that. You shouldn't like Jakes because he's this or that. I consider myself a student of the masses. So if you like Jakes, I want to know why. And as a sociologist, I'm just naturally curious.
That's funny. Yeah, I really like the way you put that. And it's funny, that was my one slight frustration with your work, actually. Not that I ever wanted you to be the master of the masses, but yeah, but now I appreciate it more now that I hear you say that, because what I see in your work is an attempt to understand, I suppose, with either empathy or sympathy, right? These audiences. So you talk about the T.D. Jakes audience, then later you talk about the Tyler Perry audience, very similar figure we'll get to, and sort of like, and then, yeah, that's right. You're looking at the same people I looked at when I studied the Black working class. I think we both are very careful about not making claims about their consciousness, right? Like what they think for them, unless they say it, right? But what you're more, I think you're even more careful in a good way than I am. You're very cautious about making claims at all, in fact, but you are very interested in hearing, is this fair? Hearing what they're saying or hearing what their behavior, what their choices might say and why they might believe this or think this, right? Is that?
Oh, you nailed it.
Yeah, okay.
If I'm a student of the masses and the masses love these people,
Mm-hmm.
I could either be condescending and say, you like Tyler Perry because you are a bunch of low IQ people who haven't been educated and you're not smart. You don't know what real art is, and this is low art. This is lowbrow stuff. Let me show you some real empowering womanist art or people that you should like. I could either do that, or I could say, if millions of Black people like this person, there's got to be a reason, and I have the time. I'm blessed as a professor with the time that these masses don't have. That even a guy like Tyler Perry doesn't have the time to understand his appeal.
Right.
I do.
That's right.
And I'm able to break down his films in ways that show what they teach us about post-civil rights Black life.
Right.
Doing it in ways, and T.D. Jakes, Tyler Perry, in similar ways. I end the Tyler Perry book comparing Oprah, T.D. Jakes, and Tyler Perry. I say, three of the most popular African Americans whose names aren't Barack and Beyonce. Those three.
With massive audiences, audiences, right? Huge percentages of the African American population, right, are fans, basically, to some degree of these people.
And they resonate with millions of Black people because they exhibit pragmatic resources.
Okay.
And a kind of blending of spirituality and art that reaches post-civil rights kind of sensibilities in ways that traditional forms of religion don't always. It's all about adjusting to the existential needs and cultural tastes of people. And I think as an academic, since I'm not anti-capitalist, there is a side to me that's curious about how markets work. And my first two books treat preachers as religious suppliers. And within a competitive marketplace.
Right.
There are winners and losers. The winners have to appeal to the taste of the masses. One of the most beautiful things about American religion is there's no state church.
Right.
So you've got to roll up your sleeves and compete. And so we can learn something about these, like Joel Osteen, he's on the cover of my co-written second book, Holy Mavericks. I co-wrote it with Philip Senatier, the great historian. And we were really interested in if you've got the largest church in America, why? And so we break down carefully the way the praise and worship works and how that's different from traditional worship. The way his sermons, he wasn't trained in seminary, so he doesn't use all this doctrine, and he communicates like Jesus. If you think about it, Jesus spoke in parables so that people could understand. So there's a kind of populist element to my research because I just can't say that millions of people are worse than me. And if their numbers, and I'm intrigued by markets.
Yeah. So let me tell you a story about that. So I had a friend in grad school who turned me on to markets, at least the power of markets in producing good things for ordinary people. And, this idea of it gives the ordinary people, the consumer, leverage over producers, right, of stuff. You have to give them what they want or you go out of business. But he and I were having lots of discussions, and I was kind of developing my ideas about Puritanism, right, at the time too, and which you have done a lot on as well. And he and I agreed on all this stuff, and so we were anti-Puritan, but kind of pro-market. And he was like, yeah. And he noticed this thing that Shayne Lee wrote an entire book about, that there was a very vigorous market among churches and denominations and religions, right? And he said, yeah, that's the only place where I'm not sure I want to see markets. Because, right, it just produces a whole bunch of churches and bigger churches, like you're saying, the mega churches.
The market, the invisible hand of the market. Smith was right. It will decide based on the religious supplier's ability to meet the needs and tastes of the masses. Now, and they have to recalibrate an ancient religion to meet contemporary needs. And guys like T.D. Jakes and Osteen are better at doing that. Now, but the neo-Marxist or the Marxist believes that, like, because you just alluded to the power of the masses as determining who wins, who loses.
As consumers.
Yes. Yeah. Their whole paradigm is the consumers are dupable. They're malleable.
Right.
They don't know anything.
Right.
So whatever drives, it's not the religious supplier who has to meet their needs. It's the religious supplier who brainwashes. And so I have a completely different presupposition about life, about markets. I believe the winners and losers are developed by the ways so the people with the leverage and power, I agree with you, are the consumers. And with churches, people who buy books. If you meet Jakes early on was able to reach the single Black woman in a way that no other preachers could, because he was preaching to them in coal mining towns in West Virginia. He was going from small town to small town, dealing with the vicissitudes and struggles that they had. He developed a knack for it, and he put that on a mass level. And none of these churchy, denominational, seminary-trained preachers have the skill set to compete. So then he's killing all of these other preachers, and they're hating on him, saying he's lowbrow, he's this or that.
Right.
Scholars are like, he's too popular, he has nothing to say.
Well, he had another problem with academics, is that his politics were no good, right? So you tell us. I mean, what are T.D. Jakes' politics?
He's way too savvy to ever show a strong commitment to any politician
explicitly.
Yes.
But how do you read the implicit politics?
I don't know what his politics are.
No. But like, how do you read his work?
Depends on with the topic. Something like sexuality, very conservative.
Okay.
Conservative, considering that
hostile to homosexuality.
But we have to nuance it, because for an evangelical, he's very nuanced and compassionate in the way he talks about these issues, even as his own religion. Okay. I mean, the Apostle Paul called it basically an abomination. So he's not liberal in his hermeneutics. So he has to embrace the validity of the Bible, but he does it in a more tender way than the kind of far right people who just attack. So he's I would say. And in the book I mentioned, he's in some ways a feminist. Compared to evangelical preachers who they're still debating whether or not women can preach, he supports women preachers. He supports women in ministry. He mentors them.
And here you go. So this was the question I was getting to, which is, okay, now I'm thinking about markets and churches, right? So if you have the values that you and I have, which are essentially anti-puritanical, and we give the people basically unfettered markets, in which you and I believe they have the leverage and they end up determining essentially what is produced, right? Okay. Will an open, unfettered market among American people, in this case, mostly single Black women, but it doesn't really matter which population, will the market then move closer to our values that are anti-puritanical? Or, right, because they could go the other direction, couldn't they, right? They could become more puritanical, maybe, at least theoretically, if it's true that markets give the people what they want. What do markets give the American people, right? In other words, what do Americans end up choosing? And maybe I'm being too deterministic. Maybe there is no like teleology, like within American psyche and culture, but I guess I would just say, generally speaking, if you look at the history of pop culture, right, in this country, it's just kept moving more and more and more away from Puritanism, and that's been a relatively unfettered market, right, for music and movies, et cetera, right? So now I'm thinking, now that you tell me about T.D. Jakes, his audience is mostly single Black women.
No, I wouldn't say. I would say he early on in his career he appealed to them in powerful ways, but
it's got to be a core. It's got to be the core audience, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then you're saying that he's moved in ways that you would consider feminist, and they are.
Yes. Progressive for evangelicals.
Yeah, and in ways that you and I and almost anybody would support who's a feminist in any way, right? Well, guess what? It looks like the market may have forced T.D. Jakes, because he probably didn't hold those positions when he started, right?
No, I would nuance this.
Okay.
Because, and I mean, it's funny, you're bringing up something very profound to neo-Pentecostalism.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too deep
I know
into
nothing
it.
about that, but
Okay.
but I like it already.
Let's look at America, because you're interested
Yeah.
in, let's look at American Protestantism.
Yep.
What in the 20th century, scholars were trying to, let's go back to secularization theory. Secularization theory says that as society gets more secular, the church should diminish, should fall apart. So talking about markets, the markets should die because people will not believe in these superstitions. But 20th century, that doesn't happen. So secularization theorists were just shocked. And evangelicals and Pentecostals were amongst the fastest growing American Protestant faiths. So here's the problem. How do you explain this? Well, one theory was, which my book, Holy Mavericks, or I should say our book, Holy Mavericks, attacks, my co-author and I, is the strict church thesis. The idea that these churches are thriving while more liberal mainline denominations are in decline, like Methodists, they're just dying, but these Southern Baptists and these Pentecostals are growing because they're strict. So it gets rid of it deals with the free rider problem. And it sets a high bar. People then have strong commitments to the church. It gets rid of the free riders, so they produce a better product. And so that's why that was the main theory. And then we argue, no, it's the ability to market your ministries to appeal to the taste of the masses. So that gets to your issue now. Why has neo-Pentecostalism become so popular? Well, because in its early Pentecostal strands, it was very, very, very conservative, puritanical, anti-sex. So then
I'm going to challenge you in a second. But
Pentecostalism,
traditional, formally, yes.
Holiness churches. Sure. I mean, I grew up in a Pentecostal church. Women couldn't even wear pants in many of these churches. Neo-Pentecostalism is kind of a post-civil rights movement that's more lenient, that's more fluid, that's women now are wearing pants, that's less strict. Tyler Perry comes from a neo-Pentecostal church. His ability to be an artist, to me, his Harvard is neo-Pentecostalism. He didn't go to film school, so his Harvard or his Yale film school, whatever film school, Columbia, was Paul Morton's church in New Orleans, because he saw this blending of the modern with the Black tradition. The vibrancy of folk culture was embraced by neo-Pentecostals, but also the sophistication of modernity was blended in a way that guys like Jakes, Paul Morton, these guys tapped into it, the best of both worlds. We don't have to be so churchy. We don't have to be so anti-sex. So for our taste, they would still be conservative. But for evangelicals, let me give you a great example, Thaddeus. Juanita Bynum, she's a famous Black female preacher who, that's redundant, but her big sermon was no more sheets.
What?
Again, she's a neo-Pentecostal preacher. Her sermon that blew up on the map, it sold over 1 million copies at Jakes' conference. Jakes helped her become a star.
No more sheets?
No more sheets.
Meaning what?
Well, because it was all about her experience with sex.
Yeah.
And then later on, finally, Christianity helping rein it in. But it's one of the first...
Wait. What's the thing about sheets? I don't get it.
Well, sheets.
What's the metaphor?
Metaphor for sex.
No more sheets?
No more. Well, I mean, she's at the point.
Covering yourself while you're having sex. I see. Okay.
No.
I'm trying to get what
Bynum's sermon, basically in a nutshell, was she went through this period as a woman, not being married, where her flesh was powerful, where she was yielding to the flesh, where she found herself in bed under the sheets and sinning, and that her spirituality eventually gave her the power to rein it in. But the sermon, I write about her sermon in Erotic Revolutionaries, my third book. I call her an erotic revolutionary because she's one of the first evangelical preachers to put sex so far in the forefront, where you're expressing yourself as a desirous, that you have this powerful sex. Pentecostals, you don't talk about sex. If you do, you just don't do it. But Bynum and the neo-Pentecostals brought nuance to discussions about sexuality, about sex. And that's why they appeal to post-civil rights people more than traditional Pentecostals. So if you talk about adjusting to markets, there is a sense in which neo-Pentecostals, whether it's music, the way their gospel changes in gospel music, whether it's preaching styles, and whether it's more pragmatic messages that deal with the needs and tastes of contemporary African Americans, they are better at it. And that's why people buy their books. No More Sheets. It ministers to some of these women who are struggling with their flesh. And I like it as a person who who endorses Black female sexual power, because Bynum, even in her evangelical context, is saying, we are human, we are powerful sexual creatures. As a woman, I don't have to be shamed by the fact that I love sex and my body wants sex. I just need the power of the Holy Spirit to kind of contain it. But like, just the fact that she presents herself as the pulpit now is a safe space for sexual discourse, that's new. And I think that's part of the market shifting, even if it won't shift to our taste, Thaddeus.
Yeah.
It'll shift in a way that deals with the mass media, the MTV age and cable age that we're in.
Yeah. Okay. God, so much to unpack. So, I mean, you basically persuaded me. I'm just thinking, let's see, I'm thinking a couple things. So the big question I was raising there was, I'm not even sure what I think about it. I'm not even sure it's an important question, but like, it's about the assumption. No, it is an important question. There's an assumption, I think, in a lot of the minds of pro-free market people that there's an inevitability, right, about people's consciousness, tastes, cultures, that the more markets are introduced, the more freedom they have to choose, the farther they will move away from old superstitions, old religions, old restraints.
Secularization theory is based on that.
Yeah. So, right, and there's like it is essentialist in that way, right? There's a
like
claim.
you said, teleological.
Yeah.
I don't believe in teleological forces in markets.
Me neither. But it's what I struggle with, because I kind of want it to go there.
That's Marx. If you think about Marx, really, Marx is the king of teleology.
Oh, totally. Yeah, but not
that capitalism. I mean, he thought his view was scientific. That historical materialism. We are heading toward a direction where this will implode.
Oh, totally. Yeah, right. So secularization theory, is making different claims, but there's the same kind of essentialist teleology in it. Essentialist meaning that there's an assumption that within human beings there's an innate desire to become free of the restraints of the old church, et cetera, right? And you're totally denouncing that.
Evangelicalism disproved that all throughout the 20th century by being more popular. That's why they had to come up with the strict church thesis. They had to explain why these more strict churches seem to be growing.
But wait, your argument is, I mean, you're not making an essentialist claim, but you are saying that markets did move the church toward a more,
with neo-Pentecostals.
Yes, libertine, right?
They were able to tap into newer markets because they had a more fluid message about humanity than traditional.
But you're saying that wasn't sort of predetermined, though.
No,
right,
not at all. And I would say Pentecostals still have their own market of Puritans. Don't underestimate the market of conservative Christians, conservative evangelicals who look down on Osteen, who think the hardliners who are like he's too watered down. So those markets have their own logic. Right. So that's why these kind of teleological presumptions about broader markets to me don't work, because I understand the nuances of each market.
Okay, so how do you then explain why the Black working class, generally speaking, has moved, it sounds like, in this direction, again, away from restraints through neo-Pentecostalism with the aid of markets? Why did Black working class people, and it sounds like mostly Black working class women, chose that particular direction, right, of more sexual freedom, et cetera? Do you have any theory for that? Like in the last, whatever it is, 30 years, like why?
My whole thing is post-civil rights Black life. So like, that's the first, I'm part, I guess I'm fascinated because I'm part of this generation. I was born in 71. We are the first generation of Black people after civil rights. Right. So what in the world?
What do we do now?
We're in a new world now. And new needs, I was raised, I'm the first generation of Black people who was raised watching Black middle-class characters on TV. The Jeffersons. That's right. So my parents had no example. I grew up loving George Jefferson, this guy throwing around money. So like my whole mindset, my whole psyche is shaped in a different post-civil rights environment that my mother didn't have access to. I was in junior high when the Cosby Show was on. So I think that this Gen X and Gen Y and millennials represent this first new way of being human. And those people who are Christians, you have now, with the internet, with cable, well, I would say cable TV first. Internet, you have access to more information, access to broader perspectives. And I think guys like T.D. Jakes, because of his intellectual gifts, because of his curiosities, was able to adjust. He's popular to post-civil rights people because he was able to brought in his spiritual message in pragmatic ways that dealt with world issues that were relevant to many people. He could think like the MTV BET era. He was able to just put his preaching and make his sermons. I quote in the book, one time he's talking about, he's quoting a poem. Next minute, he's citing DMX. So incorporating pop culture, incorporating just fluidity within his message. And I think he's like jazz. You got these people who love classical music. That's why they'll always hate Osteen and Jakes. Those guys, they improvise. They create in the moment to meet the demands of the moment. The hardline mainliners, they're like the classical people who just want to, be dogmatic about their religion. And I think there are markets for dogmatists, and there are expanding markets for guys like Jakes, and that's why he's a multi-millionaire.
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned George Jefferson, right? Moving on up, and he lived in a penthouse or something,
yes.
Or his family did, and there wasn't was racism even in that show? Like, it wasn't even a...
Oh, yes, definitely.
Well, was it? I thought it was...
The first episode, he calls... the word nigger pops up. The first or second episode.
But it's a minor thing in the
show. It's minor, yeah. But they dealt with the issue of race.
Okay, but it's mostly about...
And he was kind of a racist, George.
Yeah.
That's the thing. He's the first brash, powerful black character. Everybody else was all docile and accommodating in the 60s and 50s. Julia and Amos and Andy in the 50s. George Jefferson is from the first middle class or upper middle class brash guy. He's getting in white people's face. He's slamming the door in white people's face. This is new to America, to mass culture.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And I grew up as a kid taking this for granted. So that's why I think anybody who wants to understand the post-civil rights generation, they have to begin with George Jefferson.
When I said racism wasn't really in the show, I meant that he didn't care too much about racism.
Oh, gotcha.
Right?
Yeah, he wasn't a social justice.
He wasn't worried about he wasn't worried about white supremacy and the white man keeping him down.
His only color he worried about was green.
Green. That's my point. He was interested in making money.
Yes.
And he did make money, and because they lived in a penthouse in the sky. That's in the song, right?
Not only did he, see, you're feeling me, Thaddeus. Not only did he make money, he represents the quintessence of the American spirit to harness your environment. He's the first black character to be this truly modern character. Look, he's always trying to expand his empire.
Damn.
Always trying to open a new cleaners. Always looking for the next move. He's the first black capitalist.
How'd you put it? His environment? What does he do with his environment?
He wants to harness his
environment. Which is a classic American trope.
So he's profoundly American, George Jefferson, and he's black, and he's the first person to... Now, there are a lot of people who don't like these aspects of America, but to me, it's still a profound moment in history to have a black figure be the embodiment of American momentum.
Yeah.
And for me, as a young kid to grow up, to have this option means that I'm going to look at the world differently than my parents, who they grew up watching. My parents loved Amos and Andy. Which is a whole other thing. I mean, Amos and Andy was slammed. Again, elitist blacks hated it, but my parents loved it.
No, I was going to say, as did most African Americans, though. we know this. This is not contested. It's pretty clear that most African Americans were fans of Amos and Andy, right? Yeah, okay.
It was the NAACP.
That's not debated.
The bougie elite black folk who got it taken down.
But back to George Jefferson. So, he was not interested in civility. And here's the thing. Here's one of our favorite words. Yours and mine. He was not interested in respectability, right? Is that fair?
I'll use one of your favorite people. He's Jack Johnson. He's not Joe Louis.
Yeah.
He's Jack Johnson.
Yeah.
Joe Louis later became accommodating because he saw, what happened. But he is the kind of he recapitulates that spirit, that defiant spirit.
You know who I'm thinking of now when you're describing him, and I completely agree with your description. He's a little Trumpish, isn't he?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The endearing side of Trump for me was this raw energy that attacked political correctness. I just think he's too much of a narcissist.
And guess who else most African Americans used to like? Donald Trump, right?
I mean, the guy has so much potential with that raw energy that if he wasn't a narcissist, he could embody this more.
How many hip hop songs name check Donald Trump? Until last year, right? Right? It was, I mean, there was an article about that. They counted. Somebody counted. You know about this?
Oh, no, I didn't know.
I mean, it's like hundreds. I mean, I was sort of vaguely aware of this because, of course, if you listen to hip hop, you hear Trump mentioned, right? I forget, but it's some crazy number. Hundreds of songs, hip hop songs have name checked positively. They identify with Donald Trump. And
it's
then
funny you mentioned Trump. I believe that, and you
And he's-
compared him to George Jefferson.
Yeah.
I believe that George Jefferson is hip hop before hip hop.
yeah.
The defiant energy, the
Oh, yeah.
swag.
Totally.
You see, he walked. He had the swag.
Mhm.
That's why, like, to understand hip hop, to understand the post civil rights era, it's just such a magical time to grow up. I could watch Good Times.
Yep.
So TV captured the Black urban struggle, and it captured sort of the mobilization of the middle class. I mean,
So, I don't know if you know this, but I grew up, at least for a big chunk of my when those shows were out in the 70s, in a mostly Black neighborhood.
oh wow.
And when Good Times was on, whatever day that was, whatever time, it was like an event and everybody was aware. And like everybody had to go home and be in front of the TV at 8 o'clock, whenever,
Yeah, there was no TiVo.
It was a thing, but it was a thing.
No
like,
TVR.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't have it anymore, but like that was a cultural phenomenon that was even, I love the Jeffersons. I loved a lot of shows, but like Good Times was the one where it was like required that you had to be watching that.
That was my family. We only had one TV, and
Yeah.
we were all around that one TV watching.
And I'm trying to think of them now. I'm trying to think of Good Times now. Like, there's a lot. It's similar. The 70s, man, right? Like,
That's why, again,
right?
you're
We
a
lost-
different animal, though.
Damn.
You grow up, if you come of age at that time, you're a different animal.
The 70s. We don't have that anymore. It's sad. It's still, I think, my favorite era in a lot of ways,
Oh, wow.
right? Don't you think? Isn't it yours?
No.
Really? Why not?
No, I like now much better.
Well, okay, sure. Yes, I like the internet. Yes, a lot. Thank you very much. And I like not having to go home at 8 o'clock to watch Good Times.
And I grew up poor, so
Oh yeah, but no. I just mean like the culture. Like,
No, I like.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's tricky, right? Because there was some serious.
But it shaped me.
There was some serious liberation going on that was brand new in the 70s. That's what you're describing, right? And I feel like, sure, that's still accessible, but I don't know, there was something really magical about that moment, especially like the early and mid 70s blaxploitation, which we could talk about if you want. To me, that's just, it's what you're saying. It's like this post-civil rights radical break from respectability, and the restraints of respectability and this is, to me, the core of it. And I know you've said this too. It's the break from being concerned about what white people think about us. And this is what I'm getting at with you about how the 70s were better than now. What I'm seeing now, oh my God, right, is just this return to this obsession with what white people think about Black people. And that's all that matters. And that determined our history, and it's determining our present. And as Ta-Nehisi Coates says, it's going to be here forever. Like white supremacy and the ways in which white people think about us is what determines our lives. That's it. Don't you see that?
No, I see what you're saying, but like I guess I come growing up being Black and poor.
Where were you, by the way?
New York. I grew up in Queens.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
St.
right.
Albans, Queens.
I forgot you sounded. Yeah, that's right.
You don't hear the New York accent?
Well, because you've been in the South for so long.
I know, I'm
but you
glad
don't
I
sound
lost
like
it.
it. I was like, but I remember, that's right. You told me that once. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Queens, St. Albans.
I talk to my parents and hear their New York accents. I'm like, did I ever sound like that?
No. You have a nice New York accent, but you certainly don't sound Southern. So St. Albans, Queens. Okay.
And there are two sides to what you're saying.
Poor, you said?
Poor. Growing up in my neighborhood, playing basketball, hanging out, the people. I have.
Oh shit! You were in New York, poor in the 70s. Okay, I take it back. No wonder you're not so fond of that.
No. Here's the deal.
That was a rough time in New York.
And just for a while, when I say poor, my parents were young, and my mother was in college, so there was a point in which we didn't have anything until my mother graduated, until my father got a better job. But that was like my early childhood.
Right.
So growing up in the neighborhood I grew up with, playing basketball, I saw what you're saying. The people who grow up in a mindset they don't care, but we live in a competitive capitalist world. And so some of the skill sets you need involve caring and adjusting and negotiating and being flexible and fluid. And that sort of defiant attitude does not prepare you for the kind of mobility you need in this competitive. And I grew up living in a Black neighborhood. I was bused to a very good white school.
That's funny.
So I saw the juxtaposition, and I was getting cultural tools from my educational experience that guys my age in my neighborhood weren't getting. I was getting fluidity. So by the time I'm at Northwestern doing my PhD, I can't tell you, Thaddeus, how many times my peers who grew up in Black neighborhoods, who went to all Black schools, how intimidated they were on that level. I had been competing against white people my whole life. It was like, I mean, I've had friends with them. I've had all sorts of human relationships where they were demystified. Their experience was one of, so then they felt nervous or anger or, I think it hurt many of my friends' performance in that it was a new experience of now competing with very smart, very talented people like yourself who happen to be white. All that you've been shining in your Black world where you didn't care about what was happening. Now you have to care. And there people are quoting names you never heard of. You never heard of Foucault. You never heard of Derrida. And now you got to step up your game. So I think there's got to be a balance in the way in which, especially if we're going to survive in a competitive competition. And that's why I like Jefferson's and Good Times. George Jefferson was the type of guy, the T.D. Jakes kind of figure, who these preachers who are like, you know, you have to sort of broaden your mind and expand in ways that represent traditional middle-class values.
Yeah, so this is the dilemma that people like you and me come up against who are critics of respectability politics, right? Which is, that's the first question that's asked of us when we lay out the whole anti-respectability politics line is, well, how are we supposed to get jobs, right? Because I happen to know somebody who recently denied a job to a Black woman who used axe instead of ask during her, and that was it. That was the only thing. Otherwise, she was great. And when that was heard, and this was like, 2 days into the interviews and stuff, right? She just, axe came out, and this person said, yeah, I couldn't hire her because it was a position that required talking to and sort of winning over very wealthy people, basically, right? 70-year-old captain of industry kind of guy, right?
But they missed out on, I mean, she might have been
Black woman comes there. Keep going. What?
She might have been a gym. They might have lost out on a gym. I had a good buddy of mine in college. Every time I said axe, he would say, no, Shayne, we shouldn't kill them. We should ask them. And so it drove me crazy. But like, he's responsible for me saying ask now. So like, I think it seems like a minor adjustment that could.
Yeah, so that's it though, right? It's like, my book is all about that process, right? It's about people saying axe, and then eventually the entire culture says axe, right? So 1 minute, prostitution's the worst thing in the world, and then the next minute everybody's dressing like prostitutes, et cetera, et cetera. And of course with Black culture, it's like, good God, it's like half of American culture basically comes from like what used to be called nigger this, nigger that, nigger whatever, right? And now we all do it and love it. But it's tricky when you're in the moment, right? And so what do you tell that woman, right, who didn't get that job for that reason? Do you tell her to stop using?
Yeah, I would.
Oh, you would, yeah. So you're clear on that.
That's weird. I'm George Jefferson.
I mean, I would say,
do what you got to do.
Yeah.
If it's a great job, you do what you got to. You roll up the sleeves and you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, okay. I guess I would too. But
you know how many sacrifices we make just as professors with students? Things I don't want to do office hours.
Right. No, but I know. But so I guess for me as a professor, as a teacher, my position has always been there's two questions.
Sure.
It's what should you, the individual sitting in front of me, do in this particular real situation in your life, right? That's with her, I would say yes, and you would too. Say ask, don't say axe. But then simultaneously, and this is what you and I do for a living, basically, right, is have a critique always of what's going on sort of in the big picture, and we would want to constantly say, as we do, that people who use acts or people who perform this, debauched, cultural, whatever it is, performance, we should encourage that, generally speaking, right? And, or I should say, not denounce it and be open to it. And then, because most likely it will introduce or create new freedoms that everybody will end up enjoying, right?
That's why I didn't like when Laura Ingraham criticized LeBron James and Kevin Durant, saying criticizing their grammar. They have a they have a colloquial way of talking where they.
Did she? Is that what she said?
Oh yeah. That was one of the things. Yeah, that was one of the things
that
he said. That's the thing that really got to me. And I was thinking, I wanted to get on a mountain and yell, scream out, LeBron James is 10 times smarter than you. But he has his own kind of hip hop way of talking sometimes that it's not standard King James English.
Right. And then just whenever I walk by my son's bedroom and the door's closing and he's on the phone with his buddy, guess what he sounds like? He sounds blacker than LeBron James. Man, the white kids these days, when they're in private talking to each other, it's like it's all hip hop lingo, et cetera. And
Totally,
they're trying to be as black as possible, you know, when they can.
I don't even know if you could even say it's trying to be, because hip hop has become so big.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well,
but you're one of these. Talk about nuance. You don't want to be accused of misappropriation. See, when you're white, you always got to be worried about the misappropriation.
Oh, not me. But I'm not worried about. Yeah,
you're worried about if you don't give credit to it being something originally coming from black people. Whereas I see hip hop as something now so universal, so general that your kid, to me, your kid is like me growing up watching George Jefferson. Your kid now is hip hop. So to deny it being a part of him is like saying, I can't embody opera. I hate opera, by the way. But like, if somebody said you're not European, you can't embody opera. But what if I grew up listening to opera music? Yeah. Your son is hip hop. So he doesn't need any, there's no privilege. So if his melanin count was different, then it's like melanin is connected to the privileged voice to speak about cultural appropriation. It just makes no sense.
That's a wonderful, humane, open, compassionate position you're taking. And I really appreciate that. I've never heard anyone of any color articulate that at all, or probably even think it. It's really great. You know,
because especially in the academy, the circles you roll in, there's so much representational policing.
Sure.
There's so much, worried about, this is black territory. How are people talking about that? And this is one of the things I agree with you about postmodernism. I think once you lose this sort of essentialist notion of identity, it should produce an ability for hip hop to be white people's music. Eminem was great, not because he appropriated black music. He was great because he was hip hop. He grew up amongst hip hop. He's hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Marian Anderson was opera. Because when somebody saying, she's like the first great black opera star. Oh no, she's misappropriating European culture. No, she's opera.
Sure. Yeah. But don't we want to say I love your politics on that, but don't we also, this is actually a question I'm just wrestling with lately, because I've actually taken kind of a turn recently I haven't told you about, which is kind of like trying to figure out, and I don't know what this means yet, but like trying to figure out how to get out of race entirely. Like that's where I think we should go now. You know, as a society, just move away from it. Sure. Right. So that there is no such thing anymore, you know, that has any meaning in our lives. But so like, I don't know how to enact that in my life now. So I one of the things I'm doing is just, I try to not identify others so quickly according to race or myself, or although I just did, or particular art forms, you know, but then again, originally, isn't hip hop black music? Originally? Like, what would you say about that? Like the history of hip hop?
I would say black people played major roles in starting.
Here's
the problem with the black.
I like that.
Trisha Rose, who is the pioneer of hip hop scholarship. So before I say anything about her, I have to say she was the first person. She was the first person to write about it. That's the only thing I'm going to say about her. Yes. But I believe that she has more of a neo-Marxist understanding of
I think she's
hip-hop.
terrible, but yeah.
And in this way, she believes, again, from a Marxist perspective, you've got capitalist forces that produce culture from the powers that be, the people with power, people who own the means of production, control the ideas of society, basic idea. So record labels own the means of production, so they control the ideas. Right. So therefore, hip hop is in this battle for survival between it originating as a black proletariat movement, like that's an organic thing, versus it being commercialized and tainted by the rich capitalists. That's pure. That's Marx 101.
That's Trisha Rose's argument about it. Right.
And not just Trisha Rose. Hip hop scholars in general are influenced by the neo-Marxist logic, which again, first of all, it's false because all you got to do is look at mixtapes. Mixtapes have no connection to big record labels. They're always more sexier, more raunchier. So if your idea of hip hop is originally the black proletariat created this nice politically conscious, respectable art form that was later tainted with sex and violence by these evil white businessmen capitalists, because that's what capitalism do. All you have to do is just do a quantitative analysis of hip hop, of the way in which mixtapes work, and you'll see Nicki Minaj's first album, Pink Friday, is way more tame than her earlier mixtapes before anybody knew her. They're way more sexy. So that, I believe that's kind of the thing that drives this, though, that if if you believe that hip hop is this black organic proletariat thing, and you have an essentialized notion of what a black proletariat art form is supposed to be, then when your son or other people do different things with this art form, you're going to say they're misappropriating it. My belief is art is fluid, art is powerful, art is collective, and we all can have access to it, not determined by our melanin.
And I think what you're saying is it's not proprietary.
Yes,
there are
exactly.
no proprietors of any art form.
No privileged voices.
Because that's what's being claimed, right? We own this thing. You can't have it.
Melanin cannot determine who. Just think about the absurdity of that. The amount of melanin you have in your skin means you have the privileged voice to speak for this musical genre.
Yeah. Well, also, Shayne, stop speaking English right now, please, because you stole the man's language. Yeah, whatever. It's endless. Yeah, sure. No, but just so people are clear about this, you and I are 100% in agreement on hip hop studies. Good God, and Trisha Rose's part in it. The argument is, you laid it up. Let me just try to put it in
her book Hip Hop Wars,
language.
Her second book.
Yeah. But it's the false consciousness argument, basically, which is that which has been applied to all facets of capitalism, in particular marketing and advertising, by scholars in general, right? Which is that there's a presumption that the people, consumers in this case, are, as you said, dumb and are unable to, determine for themselves what they want, and capitalists have all the power, and so whatever an advertisement says to them, they will believe, and then they suddenly will go rushing out and buy whatever is shown to them on TV or an ad or a billboard or whatever, which we know for many reasons is just complete bullshit, because how many products fail, right, that are massively marketed to very poor people all the time. Products fail, so that the whole thesis is incredible. But what people who are not academics don't know is that is still the dominant view of.
Dominant.
Thank you. Isn't it crazy?
The dominant view.
I know.
And as a person I'm first generation hip hop, so I'm especially insulted. Again, I want to say I totally respect Trisha Rose as a scholar. I cite her in Erotic Revolutionaries. I think she's a wonderful person.
You're just saying that.
I just
to not get in trouble. Again.
No, I mean, I'm just saying. I know I cite her in Erotic Revolutionaries, but Hip Hop Wars, her book, it insults me as a hip hop fan because we grew up battling each other in a schoolyard to all sorts of violent ways that we can conjure up to attack people. There's no pure conscious black proletariat form of hip hop that's the right way to be hip hop and everything else is no. Hip hop was many things. It was about parties. It was about violence. It was about consciousness. It was fluid. It was dynamic. It was about what people were interested in. So the very notion that there's that you can police who has privileged voices to speak about hip hop, and that melanin counts. The amount of melanin you have in your skin gives you the authority to own an art form is so absurd.
And then there's the other big piece of that argument, which is specific to the hip hop studies version of the false consciousness school, is that, and you alluded to this too, but it's that real authentic hip hop, meaning what real authentic black people think is what Common says in his songs, right? It's when they invented the category of conscious hip hop, I was like, yeah, okay, this is a problem. Everyone, just look at the history of hip hop. The theory matches in no way the history of hip hop. There's just no way it corresponds with what's actually happened, right, in that music and that market, and that it's just so. Which is that the argument is that if you're not, that what black people really want and what real hip hop is about politics, and a particular kind of politics, and I'm talking about police brutality and talking about white supremacy and talking about slavery and and if you don't do that, what you're doing is you are a coon. You are rapping what your boss in the corporate office is dictating to you, because black people would never want that. So that's just a corporation, which makes no sense on any level, but whatever. It's really phenomenally, it's enraging and just so divorced from what clearly has been happening, which is, you just laid it out beautifully, which is that, mixtapes were, self-made, full of gangbangs and shooting, violence, and everything, right? but it's just so goddamn insulting. It's just to human beings. I mean, especially to black people. But to human beings,
it is very condescending.
Good God!
And
yeah,
I'm considered a controversial person, but I consider myself more pro-black than the kind of activist scholars who are representationally policing art forms the way you're talking about. Because what you're basically saying is, you as this academic elite, you know what's right for black people, and the masses don't know what's right for themselves. So you have to tell them what kind of conscious hip hop is real and authentic and right. And the other stuff that black people seem to love also, that's not good enough. That to me is so as a sociologist, I just find that offensive.
Yeah.
But I think this kind of view, this kind of policing, whether it's sexuality or whether it's music, whether it's religion, my whole career has been designed to attack this kind of neo-Marxist logic, this black elitist logic that says, I know what's best for the masses. I know what's real. I can speak for it. And I don't care about the masses.
Well, come on, Shayne.
It's not pro-masses.
Shayne, come on now. You know that the black masses are represented at Brown University. That's where they hang out. That's her world. She knows them. And where's she from? Like Manhattan. She's from Manhattan, right?
You're taking swigs at Trisha
But anyway,
Rhodes.
I'm sorry. That's ad hominem. I take that back. But no, it's. Let me go further than you.
Sure.
Let's see if you can follow. If you agree with me on this, I think it's yes. All of that completely agree with. It's the definition of elitism, snobbery, paternalism. Yes. But let me go further.
Wow.
It's white supremacy, right? Because the assumption is that music that would be pleasing to the traditional elite in this country is the authentic music of black people, right? I mean, in other words, Common's. Yes, he's doing hip hop, which of course is not, traditional music, but speaking sort of as an intellectual, political person with proper diction as Common does and other conscious hip hop artists do. I actually think it's a privileging of a musical form outside of most hip hop. You know what I mean? So it's not exactly the same thing, but it's very similar to what old civil rights leaders were up to with music, which was to say, oh, well, no, we've got to sing opera, not the blues. I mean, that was explicit. King and all of it, as you know, said that. And in fact, who's the queen of gospel? Mahalia Jackson said explicitly, I don't sing the blues because the blues is bad, and I only sing the Lord's music, etc. So that's white supremacy to me. I mean, to assume that musical forms or art forms that are closer to traditional European art forms is what's right and good, right? To me, in other words, it's not biologically essentialist white supremacy. It's the idea that white culture, white created culture, is what's good.
I would say that with hip hop scholars, to be fair to them, because I respect many of these hip hop scholars actually, and Trisha Rhodes, I respect her totally. And to be fair to their argument, I think they're more neo-Marxist in the sense that if hip-hop emerged among a black proletariat, then it does. Remember, Marx's idea is that knowledge is produced by people who owns the means of production. So you need a new source of knowledge from the proletariat that's completely divorced from the power structure. If the black sort of proletariat wings of music produce this art form, then it's going to be anti-capitalism. It's going to have progressive political messages. So it's not pro-white. It's a kind of activist pro-black advancement and progressivism, as far as hip-hop scholars that there are, that hip-hop is best as a proletariat movement when it's subversive, when it's subversing capitalist forces.
Yes.
But the respectability politics you allude to, I think, backs up your argument.
But Marxism, right, is a product of the Enlightenment, modernity, right?
Yes.
And about 150 years of, 99% white intellectuals, European intellectuals, right? That's where that comes from. And they brought with it, almost to a person, the Marxists of the last 150 years, this assumption that Bach is good and jazz is bad. That's just true. I mean, so if you look, right? Okay, so even if you look at post-Marxists like the Frankfurt School, I mean, they they're the ones who perfected this. And you've written about this, right? So Adorno and Horkheimer and all those guys are literally saying that, like, jazz sucks and movies suck and all this. And what we really need to do is more Brahms,
But I think the only difference with the hip hop scholars, many of them are not the sort of pro-opera, many of them are the jeans and t-shirt kind of people so they have a kind of urban grittiness to them that they respect. They just want the politics to be progressive.
Yeah. So they're putting
that's different than the sort of what you alluded to with King, with the kind of respect, the shirt and tie being kind of white.
Mm-hmm.
There is a kind of common-esque, if I may create a word, way of being Black and progressive that's not imitating white people, but that has its own kind of post-civil rights Black activist chic to it.
So here's how I read that. And I see the same.
It's elitist, but it's not white necessarily.
What I see is there's this art form that comes out of what they would call the Black masses or the Black proletariat or whatever, South Bronx, blah, 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 right? We all agree about where it comes from. Okay, fine. Which is a party music, as you and I know, and most people know, right? Which is talking about drinking and partying and dancing and sex and killing sometimes and all the rest of it, right? But it is, you can't deny, and they don't deny, that it's originally a Black working class art form. Okay. They don't like the content of that. They want it to be Vladimir Lenin speaking, with these beats. And so to me, what common and conscious hip hop and hip hop studies has been trying to do is to fit a round peg in a square hole or whatever for a long time, right? So they have this art form that they might like the beats to, and Robin Kelly's written about this too, but they don't like the inside of it, the content, the politics of it. So they're trying to fit it in, push it in. So making it into something more and more, and this is what I'm saying here, that looks more and more and more like the culture that was created originally by white European elite people, which includes Marxism and progressivism. You think Adorno,
so that's indirectly,
Theodor Adorno didn't come out of the projects, right? These guys, everybody went to universities, elite universities. These are a cultural elite. Marxists, right? Always.
Oh yeah. Trisha Rose was actually trained under some of the leading, I think
all of them were
cultural theorists who were Marxists. So I don't think any of them would deny that, but I see the white elitist, but not the white supremacist kind of angle to it.
Yeah.
You could be a Black activist who's influenced by Marx.
Sure.
Or Che or anybody else and kind of find your way of recalibrating it to meet the specific needs of your community.
But so one of my critiques of Marxism is that it assumes that bourgeois culture is good. They don't even deal with it really, right? It's just that it's assumed.
Anti-popular.
That's what I'm saying. So elite European culture, bourgeois culture.
That's why I would call it elitist before I would call it white supremacy.
So to even talk about politics in an intellectual way, right, is a bourgeois thing. I mean, that's not a working class thing. That's what only people who go to colleges and universities basically do. Only people like you and me pretty much have always come out of those elite institutions. And by the way, those universities and colleges, right, like the essence of European elite culture.
Without question.
Bourgeois culture. Yeah, so it's a bourgeois culture, like, fundamentally. And that's what I see conscious hip hop doing. It's trying to fit this anarchic, libertine, working class cultural form into this traditional classical European elite form.
I think we agree.
Yeah,
I think
I do too.
When you brought up Adorno, that helped me because they were just when you read anything like Dialectic of Enlightenment, like I'm like, did you watch The Twilight Zone? That was on, but you want to see some popular television show that's really smart and good? Did you listen to rock and roll? Adorno had a study, and I cited the wrong word. He had a study on music where he just trashes popular music.
But we don't want to. I hope you weren't just making the move that I also don't like, which is that you don't think that music is good if it's smart, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm saying, like, The Twilight Zone is a great art to me. It's a great television show. And if you believe that it's low art and it's mass popular and so it's bad, you're missing out on some good art. So like if you're an intellectual and you're telling me about, like, a lot of public intellectuals talk about hip hop and they don't really listen to these rappers. So I'm like, have you actually, or Tyler Perry, they won't watch his films and they just criticize. It's bringing us back to the minstrel era.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, this is probably a good segue to talk about Tyler Perry and why I wrote the book, because it's funny. The issues we're talking about are, especially your antipathy for respectability politics and the way in which intellectuals try to police based on what you see as kind of like white elitist standards that kind of infiltrate what Black middle-class people are trying to do. I think there's something even deeper than what you're saying. It's a kind of defense mechanism and a kind of fear to not go back to the era in which the mass media showed nothing but disparaging and demeaning images of Blacks.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, and that's real.
Sure.
But the problem is, I think a lot of people don't realize the minstrel era influenced America. Even it began as a pernicious attempt to mock Black people, but the art forms then were taken over in ways that created safe spaces and fluidity and slapstick movements and expressions and freedom that completely revolutionized American comedy. Vaudeville borrows much from minstrel, and so like we can't have this fear of going back to this when that helped influence American comedy. What we have is a bifurcation, or I should say a division between white comics have a full freedom to be slapstick. Laurel and Hardy, I Love Lucy, Three Stooges, Seinfeld. Kramer is like crazy, and he's comedic genius, slapstick,
right.
His physical comedy, all these other things, great. JJ, who in my on Good Times,
JJ Walker, yeah,
who in my opinion is a better television character than Kramer, and I think Kramer was a great character.
Oh yeah.
When you look at his physical comedy, where he moved his body, contorted his body, his jokes, his quoting French, he was a dynamic, great slapstick comic figure. Yet he was criticized by Black intellectuals and scholars because they said he was bringing us back to. He was a minstrel figure. Even the guy who played James Evans, Amos.
John Amos.
John Amos.
Yeah.
He left the show because of this.
What?
That was his main gripe.
That.
Was JJ? He wanted JJ to be portrayed more seriously.
And Jimmy Walker, the actor, he had no career after that. Basically, right? He just disappeared, and that must be
compared to what he was able to accomplish with Good Times.
Why? Yeah.
But so we should have embraced him as the greatest Black slapstick character. It's this respectability politics. It's this representational policing that does not belong in the analysis of art, because art needs room to be free. JJ needed to be free. JJ's, you know what he was on the show? He was an artist. The show begins, JJ's 17.
What? Wait, what do you mean?
He was an artist. He
like a painter?
Yes!
I don't even remember that.
Oh my God, that was like the big part of the show, a big part of his identity.
I forgot that.
And this is the genius of the show.
Yeah, but okay.
All of the quirkiness of an artist, a young, urban, ghetto artist, the silliness, the quirkiness of a 17-year-old was captured in the show in nuanced ways. But because of this strict kind of Black respectability politics, it was not able to see the nuances and creativity of his slapstick performance as a 17-year-old artist on the show, as comic relief. It was only able to see they have JJ being the buffoon to bring us Black because Black people can't be serious.
Right.
The same arguments they used to get Amos and Andy off, the same arguments they've been using. And so I think Tyler Perry, his films suffer the same representational policing. Yeah. The Black elite saying, you're bringing us back to the minstrel era, and it's so condescending to the millions of Black people who love his films and who laugh and find it really funny.
The Tyler Perry phenomenon is one of the most amazing and instructive phenomena in current and recent American history. So let's lay it out, because I'm sure a lot of the audience don't know anything about this. They may have heard the name, right? Oh, he's a director or an actor or something. Okay. Okay.
He took over Hollywood for a moment.
So let's do this. Yeah. So Tyler Perry, you tell the story. Tell the story of Tyler Perry and who he's become and what he represents and all that.
Well, to piggyback off what you just said, Thaddeus, it was either 2010 or 2011 when he was at the top of the list of entertainers for making money. Yeah. Everybody in Hollywood,
and no one knows that.
What you just said,
and almost no one knows that.
And that's why what you just said. I wanted to add credence to what you just said.
Amazing.
Forbes, the top.
Amazing.
He was the top earner.
Amazing.
And he did it outside of just like TD Jakes.
So
These
amazing.
people outside of the normal networks of privilege that exist within an institution. When you have more space to innovate and to improvise.
100% entrepreneur.
Yes.
Tyler Perry, 100. He built the entire thing on his own outside the system. It's unbelievable. So just tell the story, the basic story. Like, what did he do? What empire did he build?
Well, I believe that, this is kind of a Gladwellian story that I tell in the book about how he starts out with plays. He's a poor playwright doing local plays in Atlanta, trying to get plays going. But here's a guy who grew up in a Pentecostal church, a neo-Pentecostal church,
right.
vibrant
in New Orleans.
mega church in New Orleans.
Right.
So he had the nuances of post-civil rights Black life in ways that Black elites didn't understand.
And he's like your age, our age. What is
he's
he?
2 years older than me, so he's born in 69.
Yeah, it's close. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So he's now in Atlanta in his early 20s, living in his car at one point, poor, trying to do plays. He's an artist, so he's trying to make it. But because of the experience he had in New Orleans, because of the experience he had growing up abused, because of the experience, also I should say a complex city, like I lived in New Orleans, so I know a complex city like New Orleans, it's a dynamic city that you can draw. If you're an artist.
I was just there. It's the craziest place in America by far, yeah.
So he's got these advantages that he didn't even know about growing up. The pain he had because of the abuse, allegedly, that I don't want to get sued.
His father allegedly beat him badly, repeatedly, yeah.
And the mental abuse that came with that. And his desire to write and to communicate these things and humor, the humor side of Black life.
Yep.
To convey Black life in ways that were missing, nuanced ways that mocked it. Black Southern life, I should mention. South, again, not Hollywood, the Black South. All of the things that you think are the lowly, what Jesus called, the lowly things of the world that people consider. No, that's where this emerges. And he takes his pain, he takes his story, and his plays end up drawing large crowds of people. The same way that TD Jakes is able to draw large crowds of people to his sermons.
Right.
He becomes a playwright first. He starts doing plays all over the country. He develops a large following. So when it's time to hit film, he's not like the normal filmmaker. He's got this Black following. So he doesn't have to cater to what you said, the adjustments to kind of high culture, middle class respectability. He's able to be himself, to cast characters who look like people he saw in his community. And that was good. He's now this new force in Hollywood that's able to offer a product, again, free markets. He has a product that's uniquely calibrated to the needs of Black Southern post-civil rights masses in ways that no artists were able to really do on a mass level. So he's got sort of and he's able to tap into it. Once does his first film and his plays were already famous, the rest is history. Each film sort of built on that momentum from his plays.
And he comes out of the Chitlin circuit, right? What we call the
Chitlin
circuit.
Call the Chitlin circuit.
Which is about 100 years old, right? Early 20th century, I guess. Came out of vaudeville, Black working class theater, right? And all over the country. That's why it's called a circuit, because if you were a performer in it, you would travel from town to town playing before 100% Black audiences, right? 100% Black casts, directors, everybody was Black, right? In the Chitlin circuit. But then the content of the plays was what was problematic for the civil rights people, right?
Definitely.
Because it's talking about what you were talking about. It's just sort of like daily life, and people smoke and drink and curse, and there's violence, and it's one of the things I love the most about that kind of working class art form, which is both Black and white, is how it treats intimate relationships, which is non-romantic, somewhat cynical, kind of the way we all experience them, where there's like at least as many fights as there are like, looking into each other's eyes lovingly, right? Very honest. I love
people say airing dirty laundry.
Exactly.
They don't like that.
I love that. Yeah. And you can see it in Tyler Perry's movies, like immediately, literally in the first, 5 minutes of his first movie, it's like, the worst relationship ever between a man and a woman.
And
right?
It doesn't follow the rules of structure of a screenplay that you get in Hollywood.
And there's no like attempt to even, wax about love and, all this nonsense. But, so Chitlin Circuit, he comes out of that. His plays are, there's no sort of formal Chitlin Circuit, right?
No, not at all.
Right.
And he gets to the point where he's so popular.
Right.
He's doing now larger venues. So it's not just sort of like the Chitlin Circuit. He's drawing thousands.
So when I was at Columbia, I remember I found out about this. This would have been in the mid '90s. This must have been him. I think it was his play, the Beacon Theater on Broadway and 73rd or whatever it is, 72nd Street. I know the theater, old famous theater up in the Upper West Side, like legit theater. Like high art kind of theater. And I remember walking down Broadway one day past it, and there was like a line from like around the block, like 5 wide line, all sort of middle-aged Black people. And I was like, and the Upper West Side in the 90s was all white, basically. And I was like, what is this? And I'm pretty sure, I know it was a Chitlin Circuit thing, and I'm pretty sure it was a Tyler Perry play. And that's when I was like, oh shit, this thing is huge.
He was in the 90s.
And no one knows about it. I mean, no white people know about it. And respectable Black people ignore it, right? So
I'm one of the first, I mentioned him in my book on Jakes, because by then his plays were becoming famous. So that book came out in 2005. So like scholars, only a few theater scholars even really had him on their radar at that early period. But like he's interconnected with this neo-Pentecostal movement, these popular mega churches, this new way to do art. Both of these things are tapping into nuances from post-civil rights Black life in raw kind of ways that didn't exist with the existing structures. Yeah. And so, but one of the interesting things, Thaddeus, about Perry is you've got these academics who feel like they know what Black audiences should like.
Right.
Perry's an ethnographer of Black
exactly.
audiences. How many filmmakers, could you imagine Woody Allen having the opportunity to test his jokes out in front of thousands of people in cities nationwide, and then you do that play, and then you're able to do that movie? And so I mentioned that in the introduction of the book on Perry. He's got this, so he knows Black audiences better than I do. He performs in front of them. He sees what works and what doesn't work, and then he fine-tunes the stuff, and he practices, and then gets it right in the film, or gets it the way he wants to.
He is so amazing, and it's mind-boggling just how amazing he is. It's also mind-boggling how, as I was saying, no one in the world of respectability, white or Black, knows anything about him really. Like, how many movies has he made?
I see. My book covers 11 of them, so he's probably made close to 20.
20, yeah. And they're relatively low budget. Right, so like maybe made for 5 or 10 or 15 million, but they consistently like the revenue is consistently like double, triple, quadruple, quintuple that. Always highly profitable. He's made this huge amount of money, huge fortune, and as you said, by what was it, 2011? He's one of the wealthiest people
Forbes
in the entertainment industry.
Who made that? That's
incredible.
More than Lucas, more than anybody that year, he was at the top of the list for Forbes.
A Black dude from New Orleans who no one's heard of, basically. and no one's, well, the thing is, no one's seen his movies. Do you think the New York Times has ever reviewed him? I mean, maybe they did once to dismiss him, but they ignore him, right? The elite media, bi-coastal media, totally ignores him. Academics, except for Shayne Lee.
When they're not ignoring him, no, they attack him.
They attack him.
He's getting attention in the Academy now. He's attacked.
Oh, now, yeah. But well, yes. So like Spike Lee has famously attacked him,
but nowhere near the level of Perry. Tyler Perry, I wrote the book for one reason. Again, I wasn't a Perry partisan. I was so angered by the fact that so many Black elites and scholars were attacking Perry and not being mindful of the millions of people who liked them. And they were approaching art in a way that was driven by condemnation, not curiosity. And these are scholars, people who... Can you imagine Shakespearean, Elizabethan scholars representationally policing Shakespeare? No, Elizabethan scholars, you can see they have an encyclopedic knowledge of Shakespeare because they love Shakespeare. They're driven by curiosity, not condemnation. It's the exact opposite when it comes to pop culture with Black representation in the Academy. Matter of fact, you learn your skill set you're trained as a critical theorist. You're trained basically as a neo-Marxist oppression specialist. Your job is the minstrel police.
Yeah.
So you walk around with your baton. If a Black comic smiles too wide, you take that baton and hit him. You bring us back to the minstrel era. Yeah. So I was like, I have to. If my parents like Tyler Perry, if all of these people like Tyler Perry, I'm a pretty smart guy. If I study, I did the same thing with Jakes. I was like, why? What is his appeal about? I'm going to begin with the presupposition that Perry's tapping into something. Yeah. And my book goes from there. And each chapter develops, a careful analysis of what he does pragmatically with spirituality. With this, there are nuances that I discovered about Perry that I didn't even know. Like he's a Christian filmmaker, but he's an existentialist. He has very subversive theology sometimes. He deals with the issue of theodicy, the problem of evil, in ways that almost mocks his faith. Madea is she's a secular character.
Yeah.
And she's the heroine of some of his films in ways that go against, like she gets the best of Christian characters. In Perry's first film, Myrtle, she's having Cicely Tyson's character. Medea's having a one-on-one about justice. And she says, well, the preacher said that you're supposed to let God, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and peace be still. And Medea is like, I'm peaceful because I carry a peace with me. She's basically like, she says God takes too long to get revenge.
So Madea, because again, you got to keep reminding yourself that no one knows what we're talking about, even though this is one.
Even Madea, wow.
Even this is one. Well, right? You know this.
I figured that Madea was an American icon.
They probably know the name, have seen a billboard or something, but they sure haven't seen the movies, right? It's like what 90+% of African Americans have seen a Tyler Perry movie, probably, but like 0.5% of white Americans, don't you think?
Well, a lot of my white students watch Perry.
Really?
Yeah.
On their own?
Yeah.
Like voluntarily? Really?
I've shown films in class and where students say, oh yeah, I've seen that before.
Okay. I mean, in my world, no one knows anything about it. But anyway, so Madea is an amazing character. So it's for those who don't know, she's sort of a matriarchal figure in this family, older, middle-aged, played by Tyler Perry, which is also very interesting.
And controversial to scholars.
Right. So he's in drag, essentially. But so she carries a pistol and is happy to use it and threaten people. And she's sort of I kind of read her as like an avenging angel for scorned Black women, right?
Yeah, but we've got to touch on that.
Okay, yeah.
You're sharp, Thaddeus.
So are you. That's why you're here.
No, but I mean, you nailed it, because what the activist scholars who police him don't realize is Perry has a message, a feminist message, through Madea.
Totally.
Where she becomes this kind of...
Totally.
I call it existential madness, redemptive madness. She teaches Black women who are catching hell, who are abused, who are weak-willed, weak-spirited, who are out-leveraged by men, overpowered. She teaches them to put aside Christian long-suffering piety and pick up that pot and defend yourself at all costs. She teaches a kind of aggressive strength of will that I think is so powerfully feminist. And so, I mean, Madea is an existential force. She is, and it has been missed. It's missed when you have a kind of narrow lens through which you view pop culture, and you're constantly policing it, constantly trying to be driven by condemnation, not curiosity. You miss out on the existential nuggets and nuances that Perry has.
She's one of my very favorite characters in American popular culture. It's funny. I was having a conversation with some people this weekend at the Renegade University event in New Orleans, actually, and it came up. We were talking about Hollywood and sort of transgressive characters, anti-heroes, who the audience is intended to identify with, right? So you have like the old gangster genre of the 1930s, where the audience was actually identifying with the criminals, right? Or like Easy Rider in the 70s, kind of a bad boy outsider, but you're identifying with him. And I was saying to them, and we were talking about this, that's kind of disappeared. And I said, can anybody think of a movie in the last 20 years in which there's a transgressive character like that is intended to be sort of the anti-hero or hero, right, that the audience is supposed to identify with? And we were like, no, I don't think there's anybody, because it's all like, now it's the American Sniper. It's all like, it's Navy SEALs or that, And then when I was driving over here to talk to you, I was like, oh shit, Madea right there. Yes. Boom. She's like classic.
The ultimate outlier.
Yeah.
She doesn't even get her license renewed. She wants to flaunt her freedom. I mean, she won't submit to any structure. She doesn't go to her favorite niece dies. She doesn't go to church because she doesn't go to the funeral because she doesn't want to step in a church. She's like, I mean, she's hip hop. Madea is hip hop.
Yeah.
And there are ways in which there are nuances. There are existential nuggets of empowerment with Madea that just has completely been missed by this neo-Marxist attack. The minstrel police, they're just not creative estheticians. They're just not creative. I think art is something complex and messy. And when you believe that your job is to police Black art and to make sure it has respectability, you miss out on the Dionysian capacities. Perry taps into those. Hip hop taps into those. And I think, I just think that we need more scholars out there who are curious and who are students of the masses, not parents of the masses.
Yeah. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I think you're going to have to leave and teach for Renegade University, but that's the next conversation we'll have. No, but Medea's always got in one hand a pistol and in the other hand a pack of cigarettes, right? I mean, and she is cursing and she's telling, she's threatening violence, or she's doing violence against men constantly, and everybody judges. She's like cursing judges out, and everybody, you name it, she's transgressing everything all the time.
Yes,
she's an anarchic in the best sense of the word.
Without a doubt.
Force.
Yes.
And in terms of gender and feminism, right, as you were saying earlier, it's basically there's, black woman gets messed over badly by husband or boyfriend or something, and then Madea comes along and instead of saying, yeah, sister, you are a victim because of patriarchy, no, she just says, no, here, see this gun? Take this gun and go tell him that you would like some money or whatever it is, right? Or, tear down his house or whatever it is, take vengeance until you get, and not just for vengeance sake either, until you get what you want from that thing, right? It's like, isn't that what feminism is or should be, right?
Well, I wish we could have both.
Yeah, well.
I wish we could have, on the one hand, the Camille Pallias who focus on the inner strength of the woman and her freedom and what she should be able to do as a human being, existential strength. On the other, the ways in which political arrangements, we needed Title IX in order to have more women athletes. So that was something structural that had to change. So like if we could have structural and individual come together. Same with as far as Black advancement, T.D. Jakes is criticized a lot because they say he ignores structural analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But part of being human is being, on the one hand, you're an actor in a world. The world is a forum of action. On the other hand, it's a form of things, arrangements. The actor negotiates the arrangements. So you need both. You need the arrangements to be equitable and you need the actor to be empowered. And it seems like neo-Marxists only understand the structure. They have no regard for existential empowerment. And I feel like in my own life, I wouldn't have been able to go to transcend growing up in a poor neighborhood and eventually becoming the first person in my family to get a PhD without existential power, without both structural changes. I was bused. It was part of a program that was very helpful to many people in my neighborhood because the schools really weren't that good. Mm-hmm. And I wish that we had better schools in that neighborhood. That's structural changes that could take place. But also it was the existential empowerment I got from the church initially. And then I'm no longer part of the church or a religion, but those lessons still stick with me. It was, some of it has the can-do spirit that I got just being an American.
Yeah.
So I think if we could balance the structural with the individual, we need the Madeas and we need the bell hooks.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about sounds like is sort of the tension between agency and structures, right?
Yes.
So, and that's the kind of the big overarching fight that's going on in academia. Our side is losing badly these days, You're
saying losing as if you're getting killed.
Yeah. You and I are about the last ones on the ship on the agency.
Losing means you got a shot.
Yeah. We're the last ones on the agency ship, Shayne. Pretty much, right? It's bad out there, man, for this. So even there's been like explicit attacks on the concept of agency in American history recently in the last 10 years, and that's ascendant. It's mostly talking about slavery, and there is some debate about it, but basically the thing that's in vogue now in historiography of slavery is this, that there was no agency, that it was just simple, plain domination and oppression, that the slaves had no agency whatsoever in that relationship. And this is following on about 40 or 50 years of scholarship like Eugene Genovese and Kenneth Stamp and all the rest of them. Almost every book before then for about 50 years was all about what Genovese said was the world the slaves made, right? It was all about how slaves made their world, at least in part, despite the structure in which they were enmeshed and trapped.
The Black church was the invisible institution before it was the Black church on the plantation.
And you've been calling the anti-agency school neo-Marxist, which I totally agree with, but it's also what people would call identity politics these days is infected by this, right? So identity politics at least has become, I don't think it needs to be and wasn't always, but it certainly is now. It's dominated by this idea, right, of victimhood and no agency and oppression and white supremacy, and that's the end of the world, right? and it's always been this way, and it'll always be this way. That's the Ta-Nehisi Coates thing, which, it's part of this Afro-pessimism genre from the 1970s. It's kind of an amazing concept, but you're right in terms of neo-Marxism. I think it comes out of Adorno and the Frankfurt School, right? And that was the argument, was that as we've been saying, the masses are completely under the sway of the capitalist class, and whatever the capitalist class wants us to think and want and need, we will. So you must know Stanley.
That was great.
Was it?
I'm just sitting here.
Oh, you like that? Oh, I didn't know what the nodding was. I'm glad. You must know Stanley Aronowitz, right? Or at least know of his work. Oh, really? Sociologist.
I'm terrible with names, though.
Stanley Aronowitz, CUNY, sociology guy, a Marxist, but the best kind of Marxist. So I learned this critique from him many decades ago. I remember him giving a talk about the Frankfurt School to an audience of Frankfurt School people, like the New School for Social Research, right? Where I used to teach. It's all Horkheimer, horrible. But and he's talking to them. Stanley was a badass. He would stand up in front of a whole room full of Frankfurt School people and say, you know what? The Frankfurt School philosophy is conservative. Because it's Ta-Nehisi Coates is conservative, reactionary. He's saying you have no control. There's nothing that can be done. So what are we left with? You just wait for history to roll over you, I guess, right? It's just fundamentally, if the capitalist class controls our lives, then what is there to be done?
I just think it's ironic that some of the people saying this, make close to $200,000 a year.
Yeah. Well, there is that too.
It's so ironic.
Right.
Especially in the academy, Black academics. Some at these elite schools. Yeah. I have friends. I know what they make. Some of them make like $250,000 a year, and they hate capitalism.
Oh, I know.
I always want to ask people, okay, if you're such a socialist and you just believe that that's the best way to go, are you willing to divide your current salary in half right now? Mm-hmm. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's the capitalist system that produced the kind of academic system where you can make a living differently than there are people in other countries much smarter than us who may make 1/3 as professor.
Yeah, I get a little annoyed when someone who's received a MacArthur Fellowship and a Ford Fellowship and has tenure at Princeton is telling me about how capitalism is terrible and white supremacist when I've been an adjunct at best my entire career.
It sounds like you have somebody specific in mind.
Oh, no, that just described about 20 people, right?
Oh, okay. I thought you took about one.
No, for real. Like that describes I seriously, like at least 20 people. Am I wrong? Like Black scholars at the elite level? Holy shit. They get everything they could ever. They write their own ticket. That's just undeniable, but whatever. That's a secondary point. So,
but part of their ability to be who they are is because they're talented. Some of them are talented.
Sure.
They've worked hard,
sure,
and they've been able to adjust to meet the challenges. That on any academic level, anybody who has a PhD, I respect. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like anybody who does MMA, I respect. You get in the octagon, and I respect you. But anybody with a PhD, the hoops you have to jump through. If you made the process, the scrutiny you're under, I want to shake your hand and say, it's not the elitist side of me that says that. It's the competitive systems. Anybody who, like Division I athletes, my athletes, I look at them differently than other professors. I see that they were part of a pyramid of millions of athletes, and it goes to at the top. These are the best of the best. They survived AAU, they thrived, so they got recruited and so like anything like that. So if you've been through a PhD program, to get into one is tough. To survive one is tough. So some of them, through their own wits, I know some of these guys. One person in particular I want to say, Eddie Glaude is one of them. I'm telling you, one of the most brilliant cats you can ever talk to.
Really?
Every conversation I've had with him, every moment I've been around, every time at conferences early on, like at American Academy of Religion, somebody will give a presentation. In 2 minutes, what he says is more brilliant sometimes than what they said in the whole presentation. This is a guy who, you don't get that fluid, that ingenious in conveying ideas without a kind of agentive capacity that goes beyond structures, a kind of motivation. So, but when you look at his politics, I think doesn't really have an explanation for his own genius. That's kind of my opinion.
There you go. Okay, I love that. That's great. I love that formulation. Yeah, that's what I'm always running up against. I'm like, wait, you're way too smart to be saying this. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think he doesn't have the nuance that his life exhibited to be who he is. The fluidity to conquer these environments, to go from I think Morehouse, then Temple, then Princeton, and to survive in these environments, and to be mentored by a guy like Cornel West, but then to carve your own space. I think that takes a kind of improvisational mobility, a kind of interpretive wizardry, a harnessing of your environment that's very American. But and to do that, you have to have talent and grit.
Sure.
Things that make people good entrepreneurs and capitalists that involve agentive capacities.
Right. You
need opportunities, and you need. I'm not saying it's all agency, but you need to be an existential force, and you need to exist within an arena of opportunity.
But Eddie Glaude, isn't he the chair of the Afro-American? What's it called? Afro-American. It's called Afro-American Studies at Princeton, right? That's the right. I think so. Yeah. So he's a major figure in this. He's very much a structuralist, though, right? Doesn't he? Yeah, he does not basically believe in agency.
Well, I would say his politics does not reflect the type of agency it takes to be an Eddie Glaude.
He also does. He is the worst practitioner of a thing that I really hate among academics, and you don't do it at all, at least not so far, at all, not once. I don't think you've done this. Right. Every sentence with Eddie Glaude ends with right, which I do sometimes, so I can't blame him too much, but it just drives me nuts. Anyway,
I was on
that's a meaningless
Mark
aside.
Lamont's
Mark
Lamont Hill's HuffPost Live with him, and he disagreed with me. But even how he disagreed with me, I was thinking, damn, that's a good point, man. I was talking to Kamasi Hill about that. Kamasi,
that's our mutual friend. That's how I know you, is my friend Kamasi Hill. Yeah,
who's another person who I think.
Let's talk about Kamasi.
He's an amazing figure because he's a bridge. He's friends with all of these incredible people in the academy, but he's connected to all of these powerful people outside of the academy. So he's able to see the silliness of the academy, but yet has a PhD and he's got great intellectual gifts. So he's, for me, is the perfect soundboard because he's in and out, he's connected and detached, and he sees with the clairvoyance of he's really clever in the way in which he critiques the excesses of the academy.
Yeah, we should talk about Kamasi because he's important in a lot of ways. I love Kamasi's one.
Brilliant dude.
He's a very good friend of mine. Have you been to his apartment in Chicago?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
the great art.
God damn, it's amazing. He has probably one of the greatest collections of African American art in the world, and it's all in his apartment. It's a museum, but it's really fine stuff. I mean, he really has good taste too. It's obviously a political project, but he also clearly, truly enjoys all forms of Black culture, high art, high African American art, low African American art, low pop culture, all of it. His apartment is everyone should see that place and go there. It's really amazing. And so Kamasi comes from a Black nationalist family, 1960s, 1970s generation Black nationalist family, hardcore Black nationalist radical family in Detroit, right? And, his mother and dad, always, white man is the devil, period. That's what he grew up with, straight up. White people were the devil. And he said it was hard for him to befriend me.
But his father has a degree from Harvard.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, well, there's, as we've been saying, there's lots of contradictions in the minds of a lot of academics in particular. Yeah, it was hard for him to be my friend because of that. He's gotten over it for sure, but we became friends about, I don't know what it is now, 10 years now. And he said he had to, because he became a public school teacher. So of course he had to talk to white people and be friends with white people. But so the point I'm getting to here is that Kamasi is part of, I guess what you would call, sort of the Black Pride 70s movement, and all of what's come out of that since then, which is still very much a part of Black culture generally, and that's one thing, with the help of my friend Camille Foster, who you should meet and talk to, by the way. We'll talk about him later. But it made me change my mind about that. So I used to be, as you know, and anybody who's read my work knows, a big fan of Black culture and Black working class culture. And so when Black people now would sort of identify with the history of Black culture, positively and take pride in what Black people in the past had produced, I was into it because I love Black culture. It's like, you're Black, sure. Now I'm thinking, with the help of my friend Camille Foster, that maybe that's not a good move, because first of all, you're essentializing Black people by being, as you were saying, like, because you have a melanin count, what do you have to do with John Coltrane? You know what I mean? And on the other hand, also, well, if you're going to take credit for what John Coltrane did, then don't you need to take the blame for what the bad Black people did too?
I just never understand how
so you're cool. You like this though. You like my argument here?
I never can understand the inconsistencies that go with racial policing.
Okay, good. I was wondering about this.
Someone you brought up when you were talking to Joe Rogan, Rachel
Dolezal.
Uh-huh. So many Black academics were, and this is something Kamasi and I talked about a lot. So many Black academics, so many Black people on the left were criticizing her, like she's not she's not Black.
Yeah.
Which to me is the most absurd thing from this vantage point. Here's a person who has Black children, has had for a while a Black partner, went to a Black university, worked in the one of the most prominent Black organizations as a leader,
NAACP,
and had a phenotypical presence that before she was outed, most people around her just presumed she was Black. And somehow, but she's missing some kind of essential kernel in the soul. What is she? Is it neurological?
I'll tell you.
What is she missing?
I'll tell you, because this is what was said by especially Black women critics of her. She never experienced the suffering of Black people.
That's the Black people in Martha's Vineyard and ask them about suffering.
Don't you remember that was like I think that was the core of their criticism, was that to be Black is to suffer, and she never experienced that suffering. Therefore, it is illegitimate for her to claim herself as Black. In other words, right, this is another thing that goes on with victimhood politics, right?
Essentializing Black.
Yeah.
Based on
to be Black is to be a suffering object, essentially.
What about the Black people in Martha's Vineyard? They're living pretty well. The George Jeffersons, Black middle class people who aren't suffering, are they not Black?
Yeah.
So to define, again,
I guess, yeah.
The logic of it, it's insane to define Black people in any way,
right?
Whether it's based on jazz,
sure,
hip hop, whatever it is. If you create a rubric or you create lines of demarcation, I'm going to be able to deconstruct those lines. I'm going to show you Black people who don't exist within those lines of demarcation.
Of course, like all people, like all groups, of course, right? You can find any type of Black person you want. Yeah, no, but
she did suffer when she is. She has a Black phenotype.
Sure.
So where she goes, she's experienced as a Black woman. So when you say she doesn't know what it she does know, and she has Black children. She appears to be Black.
Yeah.
What if you found out that I'm really white? That this is some kind of pill that I took.
You mean phenotypically white? Yeah. Right, yeah.
That I'm genetically white, or whatever. However you
colored you wore blackface on your way over here.
Took a pill. And let's say I had no one knew for all of these years.
Yeah, right.
So what's missing? If I'm experiencing, if people are presuming, or Jewish is a better example, because there's some people. Let's say that somebody's Jewish. And all their life they've been thinking they're Jewish, and then they find out that their great grandparents really weren't Jewish, so they're not technically ethnically Jewish, but their whole entire life and experience has been shaped by that, and they want to continue living like that. Can somebody now say, technically you're not a Jew? Or I grew up in New York, so being Black is complicated when you're a New Yorker, because I had a lot of Nigerian friends, Jamaican friends. So my Nigerian Black friends, I identified with them. Let's say that I went overboard and just dated Nigerian women, married a Nigerian woman. Then one day I have a Nigerian family. I go to a Nigerian community center. Everything I do is among Nigerian Americans.
Right.
And then people just presume that I'm Nigerian. So then after a while, I just kind of, because I'm tired of explaining, no, actually I was African American, grew up in New York, but my life is so much enveloped within being a Nigerian American, within the issues. I watch Nollywood films, anything connected to Nigeria and Nigerian, I'm connected with. At what point can I just say I'm Nigerian? Is it a technicality that you're not technically, but my whole life is enveloped around this experience. That was Rachel. So like to deny her access to something that she's already experiencing means you have an essentialized notion of what Blackness is, and you're the privileged voice that decides who can be and who can't. it's so inconsistent with their own politics because they don't do the same thing with gender. It's just, how do people live with these kind of inconsistencies? I don't understand.
Man, you are a total heretic. I can't, so how do you still have a job? You have tenure. How do you have tenure?
10 years.
Seriously, how do you have tenure?
I got tenure at Tulane.
How have you gotten over with all this?
What I did with the 2 books, T.D. Jakes and Holy Mavericks, because there was such a need in American religion to understand these shifts and changes that were taking place, and nobody really had. Again, going to Oral Roberts University exposed me to a world that later I was able to study and write about. But without that, I wouldn't have had the vehicle to kind of establish myself in order to be subversive now.
Right, I was going to say, but they weren't sort of subversive in as loud a way as your later work was, right? Is that how you got over with it?
Both books were with New York University Press, so it was like, okay, it's within a university press, a respected university press. You're building in new areas of theory. You're using rational choice theory in your argument. You're being sociological, yet you're expanding new. So like in some ways, those 2 books were innovative in ways that kind of helped me. But like no one knew that Erotic Revolutionaries was around the corner. Nobody saw that coming.
Yes, let's talk about that because that's a badass book right there, and that's what you got in most of your trouble, right?
Yes.
So yeah, tell us about that.
First of all, each book is birthed out of a struggle with what's happening in the academy. The 2 books with religion, scholars just not getting this changing American religious landscape. Somebody's got to dissect it, understand it. Sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do something on, since I study religion, women preachers. Their struggle was so profound. Actually, I spent 2 years working on the book. I just never finished it because I got sidetracked with erotic and then other projects. But that's what introduced me to feminism. I was like, these Black women in the church, because evangelicals are very, particular kinds of evangelicals don't even believe that women could be preachers. And I've interviewed over 100 Black female preachers, and many of them tell stories about having to preach. The preachers wouldn't let them preach from the pulpit. They had to preach from the floor because you don't even belong in the pulpit. Women cannot speak from behind the pulpit. You can't even give announcements from behind the pulpit. So much sexism because of the Apostle Paul. I would not allow women to teach or have authority over men. He said that to Timothy. Yeah. So forget that. But that's what got me into feminism. Not just that. In grad school, I would get into debates with women in the sociology department over issues over feminist issues, basically. And I would get my ass kicked. And so I'm the type of person, when I lose debates, I say what's wrong. And so I became a feminist at Northwestern, I was a newly deconverted, I was no longer religious. So I was now trying to find my way in the world without the teleological framework that I got from being a Christian.
Yeah, can we back up on that?
Sure.
For a second? I never got the story of how you got to Oral Roberts or why you were there.
Okay, well, I was a Christian.
Okay, and your parents were, I take it, evangelicals?
Yes.
Okay,
Pentecostals? Grew up in Christian homes. Pentecostal, yes. Well, it's kind of neo-Pentecostal. I was growing up at the cusp of Pentecostalism making changes, and I got to even see those changes in my own experience. ORU was the mecca of the Pentecostal world, and it introduced me to a new way of being. Neo-Pentecostalism on steroids was because Oral Roberts, he's the founder basically of this new way of being Pentecostal. So that's his university. I got to meet people from all over the country, Christians. So to be honest with you, I'm not religious now, but that was 3 of the best years of my life. I mean, or I had a great time, but so that shaped my thinking in terms of religion and changes and the way in which preachers show creativity and meeting new needs. But I had my own intellectual doubts about religion, about faith, that eventually came to a point where I just rejected it all. And I hope my mother never listens to this. She'd be upset, but that's exactly what happened. But I was now in a PhD program in sociology, even more interested in religion because I was like, I believed this thing for so many years. So there must be some really powerful sociological reasons why. So then I wanted to go back. So that's when I became a really good sociologist, when I became an atheist.
Yeah.
So
if it has the power to shape people's lives and shapes millions of people's lives, then it needs to be studied, right?
Yes.
That's the Shayne Lee project.
I was like, wow, it was so real. When I used to pray, when I used to sing songs of worship, it felt so real. So now I need to understand why. Right. But then it shifted to, I want to understand these changes that are taking place since I was familiar with them. But that led to, though, an experience of me worrying about women preachers, wanting to sort of be an advocate for them, a scholarly advocate for their struggle amongst these highly conservative, and to celebrate their existential power. Again, back to our earlier conversation, agency and structure. When you talk about models of agency, what they do for their careers and how hard they work, Black women preachers are just amazing. I wanted to tell the story of their struggle, of their grit, but that introduced me, that along with my own budding feminism that began in grad school, sort of got me really interested. I would ask myself, okay, I need to learn more about feminism. And the more I read about feminism, the more I hated. I was one of the early people. I'm calling myself I'm a male feminist. I'm a feminist, and I would read these traditional work. I won't name any names, but traditional Black feminist stuff.
Come on,
I would read. I honestly, a lot of it just seemed so conservative compared to some of the sex positive second wave feminism I was reading. People like Joanna Fru's book, Erotic Faculties. These sexy texts where they're pushing women beyond slut shaming and to own their bodies and their sexuality. Jane Gallup's Feminists Accused of Sexual Harassment. I'm reading these great sex positive books. Then I get introduced to third wave feminism through Rebecca Walker, through Joan Morgan. I'm getting all these nuances about what it means to be a woman who's empowered sexually. And then I go to Black feminist scholarship. For the most part, it's this conservative respectability politics of women put the clothes on, cover up, don't be objectified. And so I had to deal with that tension between the sexiness of third wave feminism and second wave sex positive feminism and the utter conservatism I saw in Black feminist politics. Then I looked at pop culture, these people who were popular to Black women all over the country. Women like Zane, who was, I'm sure at some point she was the highest grossing Black novelist in the country. At some point with her erotic novels, there had to be some point where she was making more money than Terry McMillan, than everybody. Believe it or not, Thaddeus, I'm the first academic to do a comprehensive analysis of Zane's canon.
Oh, of course I believe you. Yeah.
But I mean, as a male, but again, I'm one, because I'm a student of the masses. Black women love her. I want to know why.
Yeah, but
I don't want to police her. I don't want to tell her you're hurting. I want to learn why she resonates with these people.
It's a very unusual turn though for a heterosexual cisgendered male, right? So have you given much thought to why you went in that direction and no one else did?
Yes, I think it's because my whole weird story of living in these multiple worlds. Northwestern, when I became a feminist, it was happened to be white graduate students who were kicking my ass in these debates. So then I got introduced to feminism. Put it this way, I have an advantage over Black feminists. To be in the academy, to thrive in the academy, and you've alluded to this before, it works. The academy is a bizarre place. Bizarre place. So bizarre. Specialization, the way it works. You have to go to grad school and become good at this narrow area and be mentored and then connect with the right people. And then, so how much room for improvisation is there when you have to be so careful in everything you do to get a job, to be able to, in that your area of specialization, you're pretty much groomed on how you think. In Black feminist scholarship, most of these people who read the same people, made the same arguments. It was a kind of activist enclave of like-minded people who their jobs was respectability politics, was respectability policing. I didn't come from that world. I'm in religion. I'm a sociologist. I'm outside of that world. I came into feminism through white graduate
Well, they
students.
would say it's because you came from being a man. That's why you had felt the freedom to say these things.
Which is to me absurd.
Well,
because I did come to Black feminism once I said I'm a feminist. I did come. I read bell hooks. I read a lot of Black feminists, and there were a lot of things I saw that I liked, but the sexual conservatism I didn't understand. When I juxtaposed it to what I was reading with Camille Paglia and Jane Gallup and others, I just didn't understand how Black feminist politics could be so far behind.
Yeah, but wait. So how did you get from Oral Roberts to being a sex radical, which is what you are? You are.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah. So how did you get from Oral Roberts to being a sex radical in what, like 10 years or something? What was it?
I guess,
No, seriously, like what was there? Do you see the seeds of that earlier when you were an evangelical neo-Pentecostal?
No, but I see the seeds of being subversive.
Okay.
Always being.
Oh, where?
being on the fringes, always wanting to kind of challenge.
But how are you a subversive up to the age of 20 or whatever it was?
Growing up,
Because I haven't heard that yet.
Growing up poor,
Okay.
going to schools where people had money, going to a church that was middle class, and my family didn't have money. Just being without and being the outsider, being looked down upon, gave me a kind of. Some people that tears them down. For me, that built me up. It gave me a kind of outsider status that gave me room. Like hip hop. To me, hip hop being on the outskirts of respectability gives it room and freedom. This is, I mean, I'm stealing your thunder.
It's okay.
But like I feel like my parents gave me the greatest gift, improvisational gifts.
Yeah, but
by not being part of a bougie black world where all your moves are kind of confined. So even as a Christian, my father was a musician. He played for different churches. So I got to go constantly to different churches to see different environments. My mind was expanded. I go to Oral Roberts University. I meet Christians from all over the country. I get into debate, all kinds of debates. So it was like a vibrant intellectual experience for me. When I eventually left religion, I now had to learn how to be a new kind of person. Because as a Christian, your teleological makeup is framed in a certain way where your life is organized by God. Like you can communicate with God. Now I can't communicate with anyone. So what do? I had to then reinvent myself. And my process involved reading Arthur Schopenhauer initially. The world is really will and idea, or will and representation. Then I read Jean-Paul Sartre, some of his essays. His essay, Existentialism and Humanism, changed my life. The notion of existence precedes essence. So when I learned that, I realized, okay, now I don't have a blueprint. So Sartre is teaching me I can create my own blueprint. Then I read Baldwin and others, and I was like, wow, they're saying similar things. So I mean, I felt I had the best of both worlds. I had the grittiness of hip hop and black comedy that I always loved. And that now that I was no longer religious, I was really loving even more. Now not ashamed for embracing it, and reading new people that I didn't really think about much when I was a Christian, and having this free world, and part of that experience, pop culture. I've always loved pop culture. Part of that experience of enjoying pop culture, coming to the Academy and seeing how much pop culture is hated. Enjoying Black female comics and pop culture, like Cheryl Underwood, and going to the Academy and seeing how these people are looked down upon. It created these kind of dialectical tensions that needed to be vented somehow. And so Erotic Revolutionaries became my way of saying, okay, there's a better way. And I wasn't the first. You had Lisa Thompson's book, Beyond the Black Lady. You had Starlingsworth, I forgot her work. It's a really good book. My brain's not working. But I don't want to act like I was the first person, but like Erotic Revolutionaries was so controversial. Now it's weird. Now it's not very controversial because I think there have been shifts that have taken place.
Because you changed, you did, it was Kamasi, right? Who told me to take credit for this. And he's right. You should. Really, the discourse has changed a lot in large part because of that work, which is that these second wave Black feminists who control that portion of the Academy, who hated you and were very much basically engaged in respectability politics and wanted to cover up Black women's bodies, et cetera, they have been recently embracing
using
at
all
least
my ideas,
some parts of what we call sex positive feminism. So they sound a lot like Shayne Lee, even though they still probably, if asked, would say they hate your guts.
The best example, Brittany Cooper.
Yeah. She's a very prominent, I hate saying this all the time, but Black woman professor at Rutgers, right? She at Rutgers?
Yes.
Yeah. And she's big on Twitter, et cetera. But and so she went from being very conservative, very sex negative when your book came out, and an enemy of you in your book, and now she's still probably an enemy of you, but like at least she sounds a lot more like you, right?
But the defining moment for me, and I saw a lot of potential in Brittany Cooper. I don't agree with everything she says. I don't really like when your mission is geared around oppression and suffering,
right.
and you become an oppression specialist, and basically your claim to fame is conveying how Black women have it so hard. That type of ministry, I like to call it, I don't think that's the most positive way to survive in a competitive capitalist environment. But one thing about Brittany Cooper that I see potential in is when she took on Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks had the traditional neo-Marxist response to Beyonce. Again, she's been in a world.
Oh yeah,
she's been in a world
that's right.
that has taken it for granted that the Beyoncés of the world are just they've been co-opted by commercial interests. They're just basically sluts almost. Bell Hooks would never use that term.
Yeah, what did she went even farther about Beyonce. What did Bell Hooks say about Beyonce?
It was something really bad.
Really
I forgot.
bad. What was it though? What was it?
It was something on the lines of,
she had a name for her, right? Or a term that was like really bad. I mean,
and Brittany Cooper took her on with the type of arguments you find in Erotic Revolutionaries, trying to show how Beyonce offers a particular kind of sexual agency that's important for Black women.
Yeah, Beyonce is, as you said before we turned on the mics, Beyonce is a pivotal figure for a lot of these scholars, right? Because for whatever reason, we can talk about that. Beyonce became their idol, their model for what they consider to be, proper Black feminism. But of course, Beyonce has got her ass all over the stage, and so we got to now work that into our theory and framework, right?
Can you say cognitive dissonance? Beyonce created the necessary cognitive dissonance for some people to say, well, maybe we need interpretive wizardry to take on hooks.
Right.
You're going to sound like Lisa Thompson when you do that. You're going to sound like Shayne Lee when you do that. And so that's why my book is not controversial. Now you have new scholars like Jennifer Nash who are taking Black sex positivism to the next theoretical level, way beyond me. So I'm like, I mean, you got people like Ronald Neal at Wake Forest. You've got people,
I don't know these
brilliant minds out there. I don't want to ever sound like I'm the only person, especially like when you mentioned agency. Ronald Neal is one of my favorite scholars at Wake Forest. Monica Miller. You've got some brilliant minds.
I know Monica.
You know Monica?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We were colleagues at Barnard, yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Black Dandies? Yeah.
Wait. There are two Monica Millers.
Oh, Black Dandies.
Oh, no.
Oh, different one?
Yeah.
Because she does this too. She does Black Dandyism.
This one deals with deconstruction, hip hop. Brilliant. She's at Lehigh.
It's the different Monica.
Oh, yeah.
I think. Yeah.
You would like her too.
Okay.
Okay. Matter of fact, you should connect with her. She's brilliant.
Cool.
But I'm like, we're in a new atmosphere. But I believe Beyonce played a big role. And I take credit. I do believe Beyonce came out as a feminist. People laugh when I say this. My students especially laugh when I say this. But Beyonce never called herself a feminist before 2013, I think. Erotic Revolutionaries comes out 2010. Now, you might say, well, Shayne, why do you think she read your book? She's on the cover of my book. For those of you who haven't seen my book, she's on the cover. A very nice, sexy picture of Beyonce performing.
An academic book.
Book.
And the first academic book probably to have her on the cover, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the first academic person to claim she's a feminist.
Boom.
Janet Jackson, she's a feminist. I gave an interpretive lens to say that these erotic revolutionaries in pop culture are feminists. I honestly believe somehow Beyonce found out about the book, read this section on her, and because then it's her music even becomes way more sexual. When I write about it, it's the early phases of her erotic revolutionary status. But now, I mean, her taking the next level challenged Black female scholars who love her and see her power. They could either borrow the same baby boomer mentalities, sex negative mentalities, or they can create something new. Right. And I think Beyonce and I think Olivia Pope are the two women who are most responsible. Olivia Pope from Scandal, those of you who ever watched Scandal.
Yeah.
Those two women created nuances of female sexuality that go beyond the traditional constraints, the sterile conformity to respectability that you see in Black sexual politics.
I mean, I think it's just sort of the Black woman masses. I hate using that term, but basically that's how they would think of it. Basically in conflict with the Black elite academic intellectual class, right? And so, but what's happening here is kind of almost a market mechanism, which is that the masses are basically forcing these people to change their theories because the masses want Beyonce, they want the sex, they want the openness, they want the anarchic freedom of Madea and all the rest of them, right? And these scholars, I think, basically have been...
You sound teleological again.
Well, no. I mean, I don't have an explanation for why the Black masses prefer Beyonce. They just do. I don't make claims about cause in that case because I just don't think you can. Like, why do people like this thing? I don't. But we can make claims about whether they like the thing, and that's obvious. They like Beyonce. They like Madea. Sure. So when it becomes just overwhelming, right, I would imagine, I'm guessing in this case, that the theorists who are essentially puritanical or Victorian, right? They're gonna have to eventually
No, they don't.
abide by or accommodate
Not academics.
what the masses like.
No.
Well, but that sounds like what Brittany Cooper and their ilk
This
are
is why I
doing.
think it's more
Okay,
nuanced.
okay.
Because
Oh, it's because of Shayne Lee.
no, not at all, not at all. See, and this goes to both of our critiques of the academy.
Yeah.
The academy exists outside of a free market. Matter of fact, what makes the academy so convoluted and perverted
Awesome point.
is the fact that we write these books with these university presses. We have these, like, there's no market mechanism.
Awesome point.
So you could be the most boring professor in the world and there's no mechanism to punish you. Maybe you may get some, the students may give you bad evaluations at the end of the year, but as long as you're publishing at most research universities, that doesn't even matter.
Right. There's no market discipline.
Exactly. That's why you can use jargon in your books. You can communicate. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I mean, I'm part of this.
You have tenure.
No, but I mean, Mark, when I was on Mark Lamont Hill's show, he stopped me and he's like, first of all, explain what that means. You know, you're not on a, so that I'm part of that kind of academic world in which I don't have constant mechanisms to, like the preacher has to communicate and be effective. So I believe it's something more nuanced, Thaddeus, and that Beyonce became such an otherworldly symbolic figure that her own existential strength persuaded people to see sexuality with more nuance rather than the market invading the academy so that these women have to make compromises. Because, you know, liberal academics they hate what's popular. So they don't have any pressure to compromise. If anything, they want to attack the popular.
Right.
And that's what Bell Hooks did. Bell Hooks was probably shocked because she did what she always does, attack people like Beyonce. But she didn't know that they were Gen Xers. My big thing has been, let the baby boomers be conservative. When is there going to be a movement of Gen X black women in the academy to sort of do what the Gen X white women did with third wave feminism, or the Gen X black women like Joan Morgan and like Rebecca Walker did with third wave feminism? When are there going to be Gen X black women in the academy to do the same? And I think Beyonce and Olivia Pope put the persuasive pressure to say we have to come up with a new paradigm so that we can accept these monumental black figures in pop culture.
Right.
We can't blithely dismiss them. Yeah. We can't blithely dismiss Beyonce. We can't blithely dismiss Olivia Pope. They both are a phenomenon that is so important as far as their power, their beauty as human beings, their complexity and nuance as human. They're so human that this is the beauty of art. Art at times can overpower ideological commitments, and I think that's what happened, Thaddeus.
I don't know, man. I'm just thinking
the power of art, man.
Nah, I don't know about that. So I'm thinking about Beyonce and Olivia Pope. So that's Kerry Washington, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So in Scandal, yeah. And I'm thinking about those two. I think you're right that they are pivotal in the thinking, in shaping the thinking or reshaping the thinking of a lot of these scholars, and sort of the consciousness of sort of, you know, black woke intellectuals generally. But so just how transgressive and just how sex positive are Beyonce and Olivia Pope? They are to some extent, undoubtedly, but I've thought about this a lot. Beyonce is not entirely breaking through all the restraints. I mean, there is something there. I don't know.
But see, you're coming from a very, very anarchist, liberal, open sort of framework. Put yourself in.
No, I know.
A way more conservative world where Beyonce, what she's done is just
let me be cynical for a second. So Beyonce, the thing that I worry about, I don't know if this is true. Okay,
she's highly subversive.
No, hold on. I don't know if what I'm about to say is true. I think it's possible. I hope it's not true. Okay, what I do know about Beyonce and probably Kerry Washington is that.
And let's add Janet Jackson too.
Janet Jackson. Actually, she's the first one. That's right. She's perfect.
And I spend more time in Erotic Revolutionaries on her than I do Beyonce.
So think about Janet, those three women, right? I believe they might be the first black celebrity women who were considered almost universally by white men to be attractive. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's true. I know it's true for Janet. I'm quite positive it's true for Beyonce.
What about Dorothy Dandridge?
Yeah, the original tragic mulatto. But I mean, she read as mulatto rather than as black,
Okay,
the way that Janet and Beyonce do, right? Whereas Janet and Beyonce, especially Beyonce, are like really reading as black and putting that out there as black. Whereas Dorothy Dandridge, the whole thing about her was that I'm the tragic mulatto. I'm not really black, and we're kind of downplaying that. So sure, she was classically beautiful according to European standards. And so I'm sure she was considered to be beautiful by most white men. But
maybe
yet,
Eartha Kitt was a forerunner of this too.
yeah, but she wasn't considered beautiful. She wasn't attractive in that way. Yeah, I mean, in other words,
to me,
white men,
not to white men.
I think the vast majority of white men,
to men who suffer melanin deficiency.
We wanted to fuck Janet and Beyonce for sure. You know, the vast majority of us, and I know this because I've heard this from a lot of white men, right? And you just don't hear that about other black women celebrities, right? That's what I worry about. And I hope that's not why, but I think it might be. In other words, that I wonder about black women's rage, and especially on college campuses where you see it most prominently, right? And I don't know, but I wonder how much of it is sexual frustration and a feeling of rejection on that level. Because just think about it structurally, right? You're going to be a minority and a super minority on a college campus in most cases, you know, and you're going to be among all these basically wealthy white kids from the suburbs who are all athletes and healthy and attractive and and you go there, and I would imagine it's probably hard for many black women to and there are very, very few black men in these places, in colleges, right? So I would imagine the sexual marketplace is rough for black female students. I don't know.
And it goes even further to the fact that from a young age, European standards of beauty have been valorized, so that, and now that your own consciousness of beauty, you're fighting those typifications and trying to adopt new. That's why hip hop, I love hip hop. Hip hop, for a lot of us, introduced us to a completely different aesthetic. Yeah. Like the women I like now, that it's been shaped by wrestling and hip hop, not these kind of twigs that you see.
Boom.
But for those unfortunate.
Well, so that would be the positive spin. And now I'm thinking, I'm sort of creating this as I'm saying this, but like I think at the end of the day, it's good though, because Beyonce is not, I think you're completely right in your analysis of her. She is not, she's not accommodating to the power structure. She's doing her own thing. She's creating her own thing. She's an entrepreneur. She's just like all the people that you write about, right? She's doing her own thing, and white people still want to have sex with her and still think she's beautiful.
She's one of the greatest performers of all time.
Yeah. Well, for whatever reason, they just do. So there you go. Just like T.D. Jakes, just like Tyler Perry. Well, Tyler Perry's not liked by white people, but he's become popular and famous, and he's accepted by the white establishment. Hollywood lets him do his thing, right? So I think that might be it. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's there is I think some concern for what's called the white gaze in there, maybe.
You see, I don't concern myself with things like that.
I know you don't. No, I know you don't. I'm wondering why Beyonce. I'm wondering why Beyonce is so popular and important and celebrated by black women academics, right?
Yes, I believe it's because Gen X, at some point, because we grew up post-civil rights era. We're the first era to have cable TV. We're the first era to have MTV, hip hop, all of these things. Erykah Badu, we've had so many different things, exposure to different neo-soul music, so that at some point, black academics have to embody a kind of different sort of form of analysis. You know who I think did this really well? Mark Anthony Neal.
Really?
Mark Anthony Neal's early work.
Oh yeah.
He basically takes Greg Tate.
Oh yeah.
Greg Tate is like this intellectual who's not in the academy. Neal takes his thunder in the academy to explain what it means to be sort of a soul baby, basically. What I would call a post-soul or post-civil rights kind of. So like what I did with Jakes, Neal does for understanding the nuances of being a post-soul baby. And I think at some point, being a post-soul baby with what we've been exposed to, different than baby boomers, your politics has to at least acknowledge a powerful artistic figure like Beyonce and the potential that she has. And even I would say Janet Jackson before her, which is why, again, my book, once people started to read my book, they realized it wasn't that controversial because Black women have been vibing to Janet Jackson for decades. So the way I celebrate it, you can't say I hate Black women. I'm celebrating all these women in my book, these powerful women, and I'm celebrating their power. So at some point, Gen Xers have to, I think the power of art can win out.
You do some great stuff in that book on Black female comedians, like Wanda Sykes and Cheryl Underwood. I mean, to me, that's some of the most powerful work you do. And I completely resonate with it because I was greatly influenced by Black comedy for a long, long time, but not so much the women. And so you really opened my eyes to how subversive and transgressive and liberatory they were and have
begins
been.
with Moms Mabley and then all down the
I knew that. I knew the older stuff like Moms Mabley, but the newer generations like Wanda Sykes,
They're raw.
They're
so raw. That was, can you imagine how much fun I had researching that? Listening to every day at one point, I'm either reading erotic novels or watching Beyonce videos or watching female comics. And the comics were like, at the end of the chapter, one of my favorite parts is Cheryl Underwood, where she talks about raping the guy who broke her heart in either junior high or high school. I don't remember. The book came out in 2010. I don't remember. But like, there's so much talk about trigger warnings, about be careful, and you've got this safe space where these people don't give a fuck. They're like, Cheryl Underwood now has the power, the upper hand. If you say that she's in a male-dominated arena of comedy, yes. And so, but she's up there now. She's got the mic, and when she's got the mic, she turns the guy who tries to slip her a roofie in one of her lines. He ends up, the glasses are switched. Now he's, being raped, and the viewers are thinking in their mind the absurdity of the guy now.
Right.
So like, I like that kind of trickster, subversive power that Black female comics
and
have.
flipping the table instead of just accepting your victimhood.
Exactly.
Right.
But again, in the Academy, there really was no sort of any kind of theoretical or intellectual strand by which you can show attention to Black female comics. There was really not much. I mean, there was one good book. Oh, I forgot. I feel bad. I think she's at Michigan.
There was nothing. There was basically nothing. I mean, there wasn't even much on Black male comics. When I did my book, that's what I was studying, and there was Mel Watkins, pretty good. That's a good book. Yeah. That's a very good book. But that was about it, though. But did Cheryl Underwood have the bit about when Usher wanted to have sex with Usher when he was a teenager or something? Was that her? What was the bit about the underage men and wanting to have sex with underage men? It's not Cheryl Underwood.
No, it's not Cheryl Underwood.
Okay.
It's either Monique or...
You know what I'm talking about? The bit about Usher, right? Or was it Usher?
Usher appears in the Corinne Steffens chapter, but that's...
When he was young and he was underage, right? But about...
Yeah, and then she's got to hold off the mother who's like...
And that's what it was. Sorry, it wasn't Usher. It was about like having sex with a teenage 17. Boy. And...
Oh, yeah, it wasn't Cheryl. She said, because the woman said, I'll fuck a child. And then she said, and then she's trying to keep back the strong ass mother.
The joke is right about how it's really hard to suck a boy's dick on a twin bed at his mom's house while holding the door shut from his strong ass mom trying to get in to stop me.
You're good, man. Yes. Is
that right?
Yes,
okay.
You got it. You nailed it.
Except the wrong comic though. Who was it?
Oh, it wasn't some more. It wasn't Monique. Maybe it was Monique. It might have been Monique.
Right.
But I'm not.
So this is so this is like technically. She's talking about not technically pedophilia.
That's the beauty.
Right. And
I know that sounds strange.
And pederasty. No, I'm totally with you. Yeah. So you think the guy would have been upset about it, right? The boy involved. You think he felt damaged by it?
I use these kind of arguments when people, because I think
this, by the way, it was just a joke anyway, so it was just hypothetical. But if it were to happen with the boy, in most cases, I don't think.
Here's the thing:
it'd be a problem.
It goes back to this idea, this essential understanding of age, to the point that there's some kind of metaphysical magic that takes place when you turn 18. Yeah. But I like the female comic power to. Not only do they sexualize a 17-year-old, that's how many spaces can a grown woman talk about fucking a 17-year-old?
Right.
That's the beauty of comedy.
Right.
But when they went up them, they sexualized presidents.
Right.
Here we are. We're at a phase in our existence in the United States. We went from the pandering, accommodating Black public figures of the early 20s, 30s, 40s, to Wanda Sykes and Cheryl Underwood sexualizing standing presidents.
Obama.
Well, Obama, Bush, Clinton. Cheryl Underwood said, you remember she talked about Monica Lewinsky, she said that if she had sex with Clinton, there would have been no dress. She said she would have, she said something really bad about it. Not bad, but I mean, risque about sucking all the DNA off. I mean, are you a president?
Yeah.
That's the subversive power, the freedom, the safe space to kind of tap into your imagination. This, that goes against the Academy has sex so wrong. And I'm glad you brought this up, because there's one thing I did want to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
I'll keep it brief, because I really hate this issue, the issue of objectification.
Mm-hmm.
The notion that sexual objectification is wrong or any kind of moral thing is one of the most insane arguments that you can make in a modern society. And it borrows the language of Zimmel, Marx, early sociologists who talked about modernity in terms of there's so many people now. Your anonymity means, and if you work in a big, you're a cog in a machine, you're now a thing. And so they were talking about the changing landscape of the industrial world that dominated their theorizing. They weren't talking about, the objectification of women's body or this and that. Feminists took that language and misappropriated that language to make an insane argument that it's bad to objectify. Now, if objectify means to treat somebody as a means to an end, or to treat some, how in the world can you not objectify people in a modern society?
Right.
I have the most ironic story about this. A friend of mine, I took her out to lunch. I purposely drove her because I knew we were going to talk about objectification. I wanted to drive by one of these guys who I know is always out there with a sign, the human signs where they're spinning it around. So we drove by and I was like, oh, look at that. And she goes, oh. Then we went to the restaurant. We're eating, the waiter's bringing us, servers bringing us food. She's going on and on about how objectification is bad, like I knew we would. And then I stopped her and said, I've watched you with the waiter. You didn't ask what his life dreams were. You didn't embrace his full range of humanity. Right. He was hands and feet.
You reduced him to waiter.
Hands and feet. He's bringing you food. We live in a modern society. Objectification is part of our everyday experience. So I think part of the things that Erotic Revolutionaries attacks, that Black female comics in general attack, this notion that sexuality is something that needs to be purified by love, needs to be sanctified by marriage or relationship or fidelity. And if you don't do those things, you're somehow treating somebody as a thing and not a human. I have a challenge to feminists who make arguments about objectification of women. Here's my last statement on this. I know I'm going on. Can you masturbate without objectifying another human being? And let's put aside people into bestiality. Let's say you're turned on by humans. Humans are what turn you on. Of course. Can you have self-pleasure or can you have a sexual fantasy without some form of objectification? You are reducing that human to an image in your brain to stimulate. So then are feminists willing to say that self-pleasuring is wrong because it's intrinsic within the experiences objectification of humans? No. So it's this weird kind of inconsistency. You can say on the one hand, this is bad because it objectifies women. Those outfits are bad, it objectifies women. On the other hand, we're very happy with objectifying human beings in our own, even to have coital relations, you are turning the person's body into a site and source of pleasure. Yeah. So it just drives me nuts. And academics, I just don't think they get it. And we need to learn more from comics. That's the problem.
Dude, I've never met anybody whose thinking is so parallel to mine. I really have. I swear to God, never. And listeners who know me will say the same thing. They're going to be like, where do you find the Black Thaddeus? I invented him in my lab, of course, like all the evil white scientists did. That's where we invented AIDS and all that, so you want to hear my attack on that is it totally agrees with you, but it's what I say is, like Women's History Month, when they have those posters up of all the great women in history, right? The ones who are the great ones, there'll always be a scientist. So Marie Curie will be there, and there'll always be some politician. So someone like Hillary Clinton will be up there, like an astronaut's always on that list, right? Are we not objectifying them? It's objectification. You're reducing them to a particular function or role or job or occupation. It's an objectification, but it's an objectification that's just fine because it's about things of the mind and rationality and reason and order and repression and efficiency, right?
Goes back to Derrida, the binaries.
Exactly.
The binary, good binary man, bad binary woman. Good binary, rich, bad, poor. Good binary,
mind,
body.
Boom.
Exactly. Well, that goes back to Apostle Paul. Forget Derrida.
I think I'm the white Shayne now.
The
but anyway.
Apostle Paul started this all, Walk
Yes.
in the spirit so you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For
know,
the flesh lusts against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh.
This is crazy.
But academics don't realize what you said, Thaddeus, that they are privileging mind over body in insane ways when they complain about objectification of body, but don't complain about objectification of mind. As a professor, I'm constantly objectitified for my mind.
Yep.
Other scholars,
Exactly.
you know this. Let me call Shayne. He can help me with this. So, I mean, office hours. You're a thing sitting there to answer questions when you don't want to be there.
Exactly.
So
the
how
argument.
can you escape that? But they're so inconsistent. They just focus on, and again, it's the unbalanced scale that just focuses on sexuality as this dirty thing that needs sanctification, needs purification from love.
Exactly.
If you're a woman, especially women endure the brunt of the slut bashing and stuff, the politics of this. If you're a woman and you're married, you could talk about having sex 20 times a week. Nobody would ever say no. Or if you have a significant other. But if you're a woman and you just have multiple partners and you have sex 2 or 3 times a week, somehow there's some kind of metaphysical thing that takes place with the love that purifies the sex. We got to get away from this.
Those good old Puritans and Victorians, man, they're still in us. So, all right, let me see if I can psychoanalyze you just a little bit. I'm still not sure why you went toward sex, right? In your work and your thinking, why it's so important to you. I'm not sure for me why I did, but you talked about Pentecostals, and the only thing I was going to disagree with you about, and I'm not sure we totally disagree, but I think there might be some nuance you're missing, which is kind of, I feel weird telling you that being since you were a Pentecostal. But have you read my stuff on Prophet Jones and Sweet Betty Grace? You know about this?
Skimmed it.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Now, because you were saying how the Neo-Pentecostals, they essentially evolved out of the very sexual conservatism of old Pentecostal.
Of Pentecostal Assemblies of God.
Okay.
Church of God in Christ, the major denominations. You're naming fringe people on the fringes who aren't part of sort of the Pentecostal mainstream.
Okay, then we're cool, yeah, because they were queer as hell and totally of the body. Now they weren't explicit about sex, although pretty close, but they were really, really not respectable, right? And that's why they were driven out of the profession and out of Black life and out of the pages of Ebony magazine in the 50s. That's what my article's about. But okay, cool. So your parents, though, were part of the mainline Pentecostal.
Part of one of the offshoots of the largest Black Pentecostal denomination is the Church of God in Christ. Okay. You might have heard people say Kojic. Actually, Denzel Washington goes to a Kojic church. In LA, you probably know Bishop Blake. Have you ever heard that name before? Yeah, he's a Kojic bishop.
Okay.
They're one of the largest Black denominations, period. And that goes back against secularization theory, why Pentecostalism grew so fast. But they were traditional.
That's your parents.
My parents were
Okay.
They're a smaller version of the Kojic denomination. That's a Black Pentecostal denomination that's national and international, but not as big as Kojic. But I also grew up as my father being a musician, so traveling and seeing the changes in Pentecostalism taking place, and then really capturing them.
Well, okay, so I was wrong, but I thought you might have come from the more transgressive Pentecostalism, but I guess not. I was thinking maybe that's why you're more. It was easier for you to become a sex radical because they were sex radicals, right? By the way, white Pentecostals were too, because they were all about the body. It was a very bodily religion. The fringe ones, the fringe Pentecostals, and that's why they were shamed and shunned and driven out.
But when you grow up, where you're thinking so much about the body and you're thinking controlling the flesh, and then all of a sudden you're no longer having to control it. Okay. So I mean that's a better form of psychoanalysis for me. my days at Northwestern, once I was kind of free from religion, I was exploring all sorts of things.
Okay.
And so
Cool.
as far as freedom, and so yes, that's why I became sex positive when I got rid of the teleological framework of religion.
Huh.
Because now I took Sartre serious. Existence
Yeah.
precedes essence. So I took that to the fullest extent. And now there's no sort of framework that you can say, well, that's why, and my research my book, Erotic Revolutionaries, reflects, I'm better as a former evangelical, as a recovering evangelical, because I'm so aware of the power of teleology than some of these liberal academics who are never religious, but they're inconsistent within their own non-teleological scheme. It's like as they have the residual effect of puritanicalism, and so, but they're not religious, so they have no objective form of teleology to shape their beliefs, but yet they speak in absolutes as if they do. Marx was guilty of this. Marx talked about species being as if it's something real. Darwin, I mean, if you're a Darwinist, there is no species being. So it's kind of but I think leftist activists borrow the teleological language of Marx and their moralism, and they'd have no teleological scheme to ground it. Me being a recovering evangelical, I'm hyper aware of that kind of inconsistency and why these people need to, to read some of the existentialists.
Okay, that does make sense. I am totally wrong, and you're totally right. Once again, a lot of the listeners to this show, I've been finding out, come from backgrounds like yours, like religious, fundamentalist, or evangelical, and I'm like, what are you doing here? And they're like, that's exactly why what you say makes sense to me, because I know it so well internally. The repressive apparatus. And the repressive apparatus in institutions like that are so just blunt and coercive and almost vulgar, right? That you can just see them. They're not subtle, right? Like Protestantism, mainline Protestantism is very subtle in its repression, but you got like this straight fire and brimstone, homosexuality is evil and needs to be, destroyed and all that. So it makes sense that you would be more just aware and cognizant of that.
That's why I'm a better postmodern person than most of these other postmodern people who are so inconsistent. Marx, I think, well, he wasn't postmodern, but I mean, Marx was the father of inconsistency. He wanted teleology, and I'm a true Darwinist. I embrace the full extent of the fact that human beings evolved from primordial slime. So that means there is no objective scheme that you can ever impose on humans to say that this is how it should be. I will never accept any kind of teleological framework.
Okay, good.
I'm a true Darwinist.
I need to read Darwin now because I thought he was teleological, but I guess not.
No, he's not, because random mutations.
Right. I know I was right. That's right. You were right. I'm wrong again. Yes.
It's the death of teleology.
Correct. Exactly.
It's the ultimate nihilism.
Yeah. Well,
random mutations.
Well, okay. I guess I would say, and then we're going to end this conversation, unfortunately, because I have to. But yeah, I think the neo-Darwinists, you may not be aware of them. These new atheists running around, they're kind of teleological, I believe, but who cares? Shayne Lee.
Thanks, man. This is
you
great.
Are not the Black Thaddeus. I am the white Shayne Lee. Or since we're now post-racial, we're just us. But I'm
everyday guys.
But I'm so glad finally to meet you in person, and it exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, this was great, man. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
You're kind of awesome, and I mean I thought that 5 years ago, and now I know you're awesome. So thank you for doing this.
You too, man.
Thank you, man.
Peace.
This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To support the show and become a member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredlisteners.com. To purchase any of the Renegade University video courses, go to thaddeusrussell.com/courses.